Chapter 143. So what do I say? Are you going to thank me? After knocking on Lu Chen's door and walking in, Yaxin leaned against the table with a smug look on her face, giggling as she spoke to Lu Chen. Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said with a straight face, "Of course, it's all thanks to Miss Yi's sharp eyes that I had this opportunity." Xian looked even happier. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and said proudly, "It can't be helped, I'm just so smart." That day, I ran into Sister Sue on the road. Although I only spoke a few words to her, I could tell from her words that she was very concerned about the eagle fruits. So I thought, if I don't care about other people's matters, how could she not care about herself? Since Martial Aunt Yen and Martial Aunt Lin aren't around, she'll definitely go and take a look herself, right? Lu Chen nodded repeatedly, yes, 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 as if he had suddenly seen the light. "You're really too smart, too quick-witted." Yaxin sighed, a pained expression on her face as she said, "It's a pity that the others all think they're so smart. Whenever there's a chance, they'll slack off. Sister Sue is secretly watching from the side, so of course she won't like it. So, looking at your diligent appearance and the fact that you've cultivated the eagle fruits well, it'd be strange if she didn't choose you. So," she said to Lu Chen in a serious tone, "Brother Lu, in the future, you should remember this lesson. Don't be reckless, don't be lazy." "Okay, I'll remember it all. Whatever you say is right." Lu Chen chuckled, as if no matter what Xian said, he would listen with infinite patience. So much so that Xian herself was a little embarrassed from bragging. She blushed and glared at him. "Whatever, did I help you this time?" Xian asked. "You've been a great help," Lu Chen said. Xian stretched out her hand and said with a smile, "Then why don't you give me some benefits? Hand it over quickly. How about I devote myself to you?" "What?" Xian was startled. She blushed and said, "Hey Brother Lu, you're not being serious again. What are you talking about?" Lu Chen laughed and waved his hand. "I'm just kidding. How can you joke around like this all the time? When we first met in the land of chaos, you even asked me to marry you. You're too shameless." Lu Chen laughed and said, "I asked you to repay me with your body, but you're not willing. If it's my turn to repay you with my body, you're still not willing. Wow, you're too difficult to talk to." "Can't you talk nicely, Brother Lu?" Yaxin looked like she was about to jump on the table in anger. Her face was red and even her eyes were watery. Lu Chen shrugged and pulled her to sit down. Then he said with a smile, "Okay, let's not joke around. I'm more than 10 years older than you. I can't bully a little girl like you. Oh, but speaking of gifts, I really don't know what to give you." Yaxin suddenly raised her head and looked at him. Lu Chen didn't notice. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then he said, "How about this? I don't have anything good with me now. When you find a suitable husband in the future, on the day of your wedding, I'll give you the best gift, okay?" "On the day of my wedding?" Yaxin still looked a little shy, but her eyes were bright and clear, like gentle water ripples, flickering with beautiful, ever-changing, sparkling glimmers as she asked softly. Lu Chen said with a smile, "Yes." Xian looked at him for a while. Then she suddenly giggled and said, "Okay, but you said it yourself. You must want the best thing, the best gift." Lu Chen stretched out his hand and said with a smile, "A gentleman's word." Xian nodded her head heavily. She also extended her fair palm and clapped it on his palm. With a clear and melodious sound, she said loudly, "It's a promise." Their palms touched for a moment. There seemed to be a trace of an unusual softness in their palms. Lu Chen withdrew his hand and walked to the side of the bed to sit down. As if he suddenly thought of something, he said to himself, "Let me think, I can't be considered a gentleman, hey." Xian jumped 8 feet high. She rushed over and pushed him down angrily. Lu Chen fell on the bed and laughed. Xian found it funny and angry at the same time. She stretched out her hand and hit him a few times. She said angrily, "You're too bad, too bad. You just made a promise and you want to renege on it. You're too bad." The sky was clear and bright, and the world was clear and bright. The majestic Kunlun mountain range stood on the earth. It was like a majestic giant. In its embrace, There were countless living beings. It also hid unknown darkness and shadows. When the warm sunlight fell on the house, everything looked so quiet and peaceful. There was almost no one around. Therefore, the sound of footsteps that broke the silence was unusually clear and loud. Two people came. They were Dukan Jinren and his disciple. There were disciples guarding a place about 10 feet away from the house. However, after he handed over Immortal Idol Month's letter, they quickly stepped aside. Several gazes fell on Heyi's face. It seemed that they were more interested in this young man than the respected Dukan Jinren. Heyi's face was somewhat similar to his younger brother, Hegang. Of course, that was before Hegang's face was disfigured. They hadn't seen each other for many days. Perhaps it was because he had been in seclusion in the cave for a long time without seeing the sun. Heyi's face looked a little pale. However, other than that, he was full of spirit and energy. His expression was calm. It seemed that he had not been affected by that incident at all. When they walked to the door of the house, Dukan Jinren stopped. Heyi, who had been half a step behind him, also stopped. There was no one around. Dukan Jinren looked at his disciple. His eyes finally showed a trace of relief. He smiled and said, "Actually, when I agreed to sect leader senior brother's request, I was still a little worried for you. However, this opportunity was too rare for you. I could only snatch it first." Heyi's face showed a trace of gratitude. He lowered his head and said softly, "Master's kindness is too great. It's really hard for this disciple to repay you. However, seeing you like this, I am also relieved." Dukan Jinren didn't care. He smiled and said, "I was worried that the incident would be too big of a blow to you. It would affect your temperament and confuse your cultivation. Now, it seems that not only have you not been affected, but you have also made progress. You should be only one step away from breaking through the Jin Dan realm, right?" He smiled. His face was calm and determined. He didn't say anything. Dukan Jinren nodded and said, "You are right. You have not achieved your potential yet. You should hide and endure. If you can use this setback as a sharpening, it will be very beneficial to your cultivation in the future." As he spoke, he seemed to think of something. He smiled faintly and said, "Now, everyone in the sect thinks that Su Qingjun is a genius. I don't think so. In the future, her achievements may not be able to surpass yours." Even with Heyi's calm temperament, he was shocked when he heard this. He said, "Master, what do you mean? Su Qingjun has her own talent. She is indeed powerful. However, the reason why she can break through the Jin Dan realm so early is that the Su family and her master, Mu Yuan, have been sparing no effort to accumulate all kinds of spiritual materials and resources. This is also an important reason. The Su family hopes that there will be another Yuanying Jinren in their family. For this, they can do anything. As far as I know, her master, Mu Yuan, has an even greater ambition. Greater ambition than Yuanying Jinren." Heyi's expression changed slightly. He said softly, "You mean Martial Uncle Mu Yuan wants junior sister Su to become a perfected cultivator?" "Of course." Dukan Jinren sneered and said, "Mu Yuan is the leader of the Iron Branch of our sect. He has long been dissatisfied with the decline of the Iron Branch for many years. However, with his ability, how can he shake the Kuanji? After all, there are two perfected cultivators, by Chen and Tianlun, in the Kuanji. Therefore, if the Iron Branch wants to prosper, the only hope is for a peerless genius to rise up and become a perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm. In this way, there will naturally be a storm and a meteoric rise." He was silent. After a moment, he nodded and said, "Master is right. It's no wonder that Sherbua Kihara takes good care of junior sister Su. I heard that he is extremely demanding in his cultivation. He doesn't allow any mistakes and doesn't allow any regrets." At this point, he also smiled and said, "It must be hard for junior sister Su to cultivate under such heavy pressure and bravely advance all the way to where she is today." Dao Master Du Kong smiled mischievously. There was a look of disapproval on his face as he said, "It's still too early. Let's wait and watch the show." He paused for a moment, then looked at Heyi and said, "In short, the path of cultivation is long and dangerous. You still have a long way to go. Xiao Yi, you have talent, but in the future, you must be able to calm your heart and cultivate in peace. Only then will you be able to achieve great things. He took a step back and bowed deeply to Dukan Jinren. He said in a low voice, I will remember Master's teachings. Dukan Jinren nodded and said, That's all. Just remember it. Let's go in. He said, Yes. He stepped forward and prepared to push the door. Dukan Jinren said, This matter is related to the evil faction. It is of great importance. Sect head Shixiang attaches great importance to it. You must investigate carefully and try to catch the murderer as soon as possible. Find out the truth. He said, Yes, disciple understands. With a creaking sound, the two doors were pushed open by his hands. A gloomy aura gushed out from the room. It seemed that the light from the outside could not penetrate the room for a while, but a strange and unpleasant smell wafted out. He was about to walk in when he suddenly heard Dukan Jinren's sneer behind him. He turned his head and said, Master, what's wrong? Dukan Jinren said, Nothing. I just suddenly thought of something. I can't help but laugh at Mu Yuan's wishful thinking. What is it? Perfected Dukong said leisurely, Mu Yuan has great ambitions. He did everything he could to help his disciple attain golden core, even earlier than the two perfected lords, Bai Chen and Tianlan. Everyone in Kunlun thinks that he's a peerless genius. But he only cares about being happy. He did not think about whether the two powerful peerless Shenren of Kunlun are happy about their Tieji's method or not. With that, Dukan Jinren laughed alone. He stood at the side and looked at the house not far away. Looking at the deep darkness inside, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart for no reason. Chapter 144. The wind blew from afar, blew into this enclosed house, and then the sunlight shone down. Everything seemed to become gentle and warm, dispelling the darkness and coldness that was once hidden here. He and Dukan Jinren walked into the house. There was a strange aura in this room. It carried a lingering fishy smell. Dao Master Du Kong stopped at the doorstep for a moment. He frowned and waved his hand in front of him. What's this smell? Why is it so strong? In contrast, he did not have too obvious reaction. He quickly walked forward and opened the window. As the light shone in, the scene in the house was immediately revealed before their eyes. Bright red. This was the first shocking scene that they saw. The white walls of the house and the floor were covered in a blood-red color, as if countless people's blood had been splashed on them. It was a ghastly sight. Moreover, it seemed as if the blood of countless people had been deliberately painted on them, forming a complicated and incomprehensible pattern. He looked at the bloody patterns on the wall, his pupils slightly contracted, then turned his head, looked into the house bit by bit, and finally landed on the ground in the middle of the house. There was an empty space. Looking at the curved length, it seemed to be a human shape. He turned and glanced at Dukan Jinren. Dukan Jinren nodded and said, He died there. He squatted down, looked at the finger-thick cracks on the ground. In the cracks, there were still many remnants of bright red, just that many places had already dried, looked like blackened blood stains. How is it, did you see anything? Dukan Jinren asked behind him. He looked somewhat solemn, frowned and after a moment of silence, said, The blood pattern formation in this house is called reincarnation formation. It is an extremely high-level formation in the evil sect. Ordinary disciples are unable to set it. His finger lightly brushed past the edge of a crack on the ground. It was unusually not rough, and at a glance, almost all the cracks, thicknesses, and sizes were exactly the same. One could imagine what a horrifying scene it would be if there were countless amounts of fresh blood flowing through these cracks. Let's not talk about the cultivation level of the person who set up this formation, but this technique is extremely authentic. He Yi's voice sounded a little low, but his eyes were unusually bright and sharp, as if two balls of fire were burning in them. The array patterns, the positions, the angles, the spiritual energy, the 8 gates of life and death, the Tao of reincarnation, and all the important parts of the reincarnation array, he set them up perfectly. Dukan Jinren walked to his side and said in a low voice, You mean, he coldly said, there is no way to fake this kind of formation. It must be the work of a core member of the evil cult. Moreover, his position must be extremely high. Only then can he have such a skillful and authentic method. Du Kanjinren took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, I will immediately go back and report this matter to sect head senior brother. Xiao Yi, I will leave this matter to you. I will also leave sect head senior brother's warrant with you. If necessary, you can deploy some of our Kunlun party's hidden resources. At the same time, with this warrant, no one below Jin Dan Friar can refuse to answer your questions. What if it is a Yuanying realm Shirshu or Shirbua?" He suddenly asked. Du Kanjinren's expression changed slightly. He looked at He Yi and said, "What do you mean by this?" He Yi's expression did not change. He only said softly, "I just want to be safe, so I asked first." Du Kanjinren seemed to be hesitant about this question. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Yuanying Jinren's side is indeed not easy to handle. But this matter involves the evil cult. The responsibility is huge. Let's do it this way. If you really need to ask any Yuanying Jinren, it's better to report to sect head senior brother first. Let him decide and summon them. Otherwise, your way of doing things is really too easy to offend people." He nodded and said, "Thank you, Master, for your understanding." Du Kanjinren sighed. He took another look at the bloody scene in the room. He could not help but cursed in a low voice. He then turned around and left. He did not leave with his master. From this moment onwards, his biggest mission was to start tracking down that mysterious evil cult member. He slowly walked to the white wall. He carefully looked at those blood-colored patterns. He then leaned forward and sniffed. Then he used his hand to lightly rub on a red mark. It was indeed cinnabar. He Yi's eyes revealed a look of understanding. But then a trace of deep worry flashed past. The evil cult had been on the decline for many years. He had not heard of such a person for a long time. Could it be that a demon from the evil cult who had been living in seclusion for many years had suddenly appeared? But if it was that kind of demon, why would he make a move on He Changxing, such an unremarkable person who was not even an official disciple? And even set up such a terrifying reincarnation formation? Was it worth it? Was it not worth it? He stood in the room with his brows tightly furrowed. His gaze was as sharp as a sword. He slowly turned around and looked at the blood-red color that was almost everywhere around him. At a certain moment, he seemed to have a strange illusion. It was as if he was surrounded by a dense blood-red fog that surrounded him. And in the depths of the fog, there must be a huge secret. He slowly closed his eyes. Standing in this silent and lonely blood-red room, there seemed to be soundless waves around him. But he did not seem to feel it. He only softly muttered to himself, What do you want to do?" Lu Chen left the fragrance garden. Under the envious gaze of many people, he went to Su Qingjuan's cave abode. As the most prominent young genius of the Kunlun party, the newly promoted Jin Dan and Su Qingjun, who had a strong background, naturally lived in an extraordinary place. It was on a Ziyun peak that was filled with spiritual power. Halfway up the mountain, there was a large cave abode that was opened up in the Flying Goose platform. Compared to the situation where the servant disciples lived in groups, there were only 4 caves on the entire Ziyun peak. And on the side of the Flying Goose platform, there was only Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Looking from afar, one could see the immortal's qi rising and the clouds rolling down the cliff. Ancient trees and old vines could be seen everywhere. In the distance, there were cries of apes and birds nearby. It could be said to be an immortal's paradise. It was the immortal's cave abode that every cultivator in the world dreamed of. Standing on the Flying Goose platform, Lu Chen was also a little emotional and dazed. He did not speak for a long time. "Are you stunned?" A sweet voice came from the side. It was Xin. Lu Chen sighed and said, "Yes, this person is too different from other people." It was rare that Xin did not argue with him. Looking at the picturesque scenery in front of her, a look of envy appeared on her face. She said, "Indeed, when I came here for the first time, I was also stunned." As she spoke, Xin shrugged and said to Lu Chen, "Come, I'll bring you there." That day, Su Qingjun had something to do and was not in the cave abode. However, everything had already been discussed by everyone. Xin only brought Lu Chen here to familiarize himself with the way. When Su Qingjun returned later, she would naturally talk to Lu Chen. According to the previous arrangement, the person who cultivated fresh eagle fruits for Su Qingjun would follow Su Qingjun and live in her cave abode for a period of time. However, in reality, it wasn't quite accurate to say that they were in a cave abode. Generally speaking, the entire Soaring Goose Terrace was actually within the range of Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Walking on it meant that they were in her cave abode. However, the cave abode where Su Qingjun usually lived and cultivated referred to the wide stone cave that was opened on the side of the mountain wall of the Flying Goose platform. Usually, the cave door was closed and outsiders could not enter. The place where Lu Chen was going to stay was a mountain forest more than 100 feet away from the cave door. There was a spiritual field here, which was full of spiritual power and fertile land. Bai Chao Tang had also transplanted the 7 best eagle fruit trees here. In the following time, Lu Chen's task was to take care of these eagle fruit trees. Once the eagle fruit was found to be ripe, he must immediately inform Su Qingjun in the cave abode and let her eat it as soon as possible. Then, the medicine would circulate through all the meridians in her body without any loss. From then on, she would achieve the perfect Jindan state. However, at this time, Lu Chen was frowning and staring blankly at the side of the spiritual field. It was obviously a newly built hut. "Am I going to live here?" he asked Exin. Exin glared at him and said angrily, "Isn't that nonsense? Do you really want to live in the cave abode over there?" Lu Chen shook his head and said with emotion, "Not really. But isn't it too shabby to prepare a hut for me? Hey, you're just a servant disciple. Don't talk as if you're already Jindan friar, okay?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "You girl, your mouth is so poisonous. Be careful that no one will dare to want you in the future." "But, none of your business." Exin snorted and then walked over to open the door of the hut. She took a look inside and then turned back with a smile. "Brother Lu, it looks not bad." Lu Chen smiled and walked over. He stood in the hut and looked around. The hut was neither big nor small. There was a bed and a table inside. It could be considered simple and plain. "Anyway, I'll make do," he said with a smile. "I don't ask for too much for the workers." Exin laughed and walked to the door again. She said, "Brother Lu, your hut is more than 10 feet away from the door of Sister Sue's cave abode. When the eagle fruit ripens, will you make it in time to call her?" "I'll make it in time," Lu Chen said carelessly. "As long as it doesn't exceed 10 minutes, the primitive spiritual energy of the eagle fruit won't dissipate. It doesn't matter. Of course, unless she leaves here and isn't in the cave abode. If that's the case, I can't do anything no matter how capable I am." Exin said with a smile, "Don't worry about this. I heard from Martial Uncle Yen that he has discussed it with Sister Sue. She will only do this during this period of time. Unless something big happens, she won't leave the cave abode." Lu Chen narrowed his eyes and then nodded with a smile. "That's good." Chapter 145. Su Qingjun returned to the Flying Goose Terrace abode on Purple Cloud Peak in the afternoon. By this time, Exin had already left. Lu Chen put down his luggage, tidied up the hut, and went to work in the spirit field outside the hut. The spirit field was about 2 acres in size. The 7 eagle fruit trees were transplanted here, spaced very loosely between each other. This was also to provide these precious spirit materials with sufficient spirit energy and nutrition. Lu Chen carefully looked at the eagle fruit trees one by one. After he had an idea, he chose a few trees that looked the most likely to bear fruit first and cultivated them. When he was tired, he sat down on the embankment to rest. Looking at the hut on the other side, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He muttered to himself, "After living in a hut for so long, I finally managed to live in a brick house, and now I'm living in a hut. I'm really regressing." "What do you mean regressing?" A clear and melodious voice came from behind him. Lu Chen turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing on the embankment not far away. She was looking at him. Lu Chen laughed and stood up. "I was just joking. It's fine." Su Qingjun didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at Lu Chen seriously and said, "Lu Chen, the eagle fruit tree is very important to my cultivation. I don't want anything to go wrong." Lu Chen was stunned. He seemed to have never expected that Su Qingjun would actually attach such importance to this matter, so he straightened his expression and said, "Don't worry, Senior Sister Su. I fought hard for this matter, so I naturally have to do a good job. I absolutely won't be perfunctory or overlook it." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "That's good." After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something again. He hesitated for a moment, looked at Lu Chen and said, "In addition, if you do this well for me, I will definitely reward you handsomely. Moreover, it will definitely be much better than the usual practice in Liuxiang Garden. In short, I will definitely not let you go back to where you were before. You can rest assured about this." A rare trace of embarrassment flashed across Lu Chen's face. He smiled bitterly and said, "Then I thank you very much." Su Qingjun nodded to him, then turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But at this time, Lu Chen suddenly called out to her, saying, "Shiji Su, I'm sure you know this eagle fruit's character. I'll take good care of it, and once it's ripe I'll call you. But since I want to do this well, I still have to discuss it with you face to face. During this period of time, you can't leave the cave at will." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Of course. I've left the mountain early recently to deal with some chores. For the next 20 days, I'll be staying in the cave residence to meditate. You can rest assured." Lu Chen grinned and said, "Okay." Su Qingjun glanced at him, turned around with an indifferent expression, and walked towards the cave residence in the distance. And Lu Chen sat down again on the ridge of the field, looked at the spiritual field in front of him, and then looked at the blue sky above his head. Seeing the blue sky and white clouds, as clear as a wash, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He laughed softly and said, "I've made a name for myself in farming? If there's day, there's night, and if there's light, there's darkness." When Lu Chen stood under the clear and bright sky, sighing with emotion on the fairyland-like flying goose platform, feeling that there were still some bright and beautiful things in life, in another place in the Kunlun Mountains, he who was walking on the mountain road, felt a trace of coldness in his heart. He always felt that the place in front of him was a little dark. The Kunlun Mountains were very large, and most of the places were bright and spacious. Just like the famous sect, the Kunlun Party, it was full of righteousness and awe-inspiring momentum. But such a large cultivation sect, of course, it was impossible for everything to be as it seemed on the surface. At least in the eyes of He, the mountain he was heading to at the moment, the place hidden in the shadows behind the mountain peak, was dark and cold. Even though it was daytime and the sun was hanging high in the sky, the feeling it gave people still hadn't changed. The mountain was Nameless Mountain. For many years, it didn't have a name. It seemed that no one was willing to waste their brains to give this damn place a name. So after a long time, Nameless Mountain actually became the official name of this mountain. Nameless Mountain was a small mountain hidden in the Kunlun Mountains. It was surrounded by tall mountain ridges, so most of the light was blocked by the high mountains. This small mountain was dark, cold, lonely, and cold. It had never been liked by people. In the shadow of Nameless Mountain, in an even darker corner, there was a house that looked like an ancestral hall. Righteous Grave. He looked at the house that seemed very dark even in the daytime, and slowly read the words on the plaque hanging above the door. A grave was a grave, a place to take in the corpses of the dead. But in the Kunlun Mountains, not all the cultivators of the Kunlun Party would come here after they passed away. 4 cultivators with profound cultivation such as Zhenjuan, Zhenren, Jin Dan, and Foundation Establishment, the Kunlun Party would naturally have a beautiful cemetery to bury them. They would enjoy the incense offerings of the younger generation day and night. During festivals, it would be incomparably lively. It was like a completely different world from the Righteous Grave. This dark and cold place took in some lonely and wild ghosts. It took in some people who couldn't enter the bright cemetery of the majestic Kunlun. He Changsheng's corpse was placed here. Of course, it was reasonable to say that if they really wanted to investigate properly, this corpse should not have been moved. But even if the Kunlun Party's methods were powerful, they still couldn't keep a corpse in a place where people gathered for a long time. In addition, He Changsheng had lived his entire life in obscurity and died without a sound. Of course, he couldn't enter the Kunlun cemetery, so he could only be placed here in the righteous grave. The gate of the righteous grave was painted black. In this dark shadow of the mountain, it seemed particularly thick and heavy, but it also gave off a somewhat gloomy feeling. He stood outside the gate and gently exhaled. This was also his first time here. Normally, almost no disciple of the Kunlun party would be willing to come here. He walked forward and knocked twice on the gate of the righteous grave. His low and deep voice spread out, but behind the gate was silence. There was no response. He furrowed his brows and used all his strength to knock a few more times. This time, the sound was even louder than before. However, in this silence, the sound that suddenly sounded was like an abrupt howl that made people's hearts tremble. After a moment, the sound of footsteps came from behind the gate. It slowly approached and then opened the black gate. A thin and old face peeked out from the gap of the gate. For a moment, he couldn't clearly see how old this man was. However, what gave him the deepest impression was the eyes of this old man who guarded the righteous grave. There was almost no light in those eyes. There was only numbness and dullness, as if he had reached the final juncture of his life and was about to run out of oil. "What's the matter?" That pair of cold and numb eyes fell on Heyi's face. Perhaps it was the gloomy atmosphere and dark aura behind him that made Heyi subconsciously shiver. However, he was after all a cultivator with profound cultivation and outstanding talent. He quickly calmed down and then handed over a warrant from his bosom. "My name is He. Under the orders of the sect leader, I am here to inspect He Changsheng's corpse that was delivered here a few days ago." This corpse watcher did not reach out to receive it. He only glanced down and then looked at He. After a moment of silence, he slowly pushed open the half door and said in a hoarse voice, "Come in." Seeing this corpse watcher move aside, he hesitated for a moment and then stepped into the righteous grave. The moment he stepped over the threshold, he seemed to have a feeling that the sky had suddenly turned darker. Most of the houses in this righteous grave were painted black. A row of more than 10 coffins were placed side by side under one of the walls of this courtyard. On the other side, there were many rooms in front and behind. Some of the rooms looked pitch black while some of the rooms were lit up with specks of candlelight, emitting a faint light. As if he saw the doubt in Heyi's eyes, the corpse watcher slowly walked past him and said in a low voice, "Those with candlelight are those who have just died. The road to the netherworld is long and hard to walk in the dark. There must be some light to make it easier to walk." Heyi's expression changed slightly. He suddenly asked again, "What about those dark houses?" The corpse watcher turned his head somewhat woodenly and glanced at him. That pair of eyes seemed to have only a turbid haze and numbness. He said, "Those have been dead for a long time. Even their souls have gone far away." He stared at this corpse watcher, his pupils slightly contracted. Before today, he knew about this place called the Righteous Grave, but he had never been here before. Naturally, he would not know that this place was so gloomy and terrifying, and that there was such a ghastly corpse watcher. If he had not confirmed that he was indeed in the Kunlun Mountains and this righteous grave was indeed the Kunlun party's territory, he would have even thought that this person before him was some kind of evil demon. He even felt that those vicious and evil evildoers from the evil sect that he had met before, in terms of gloomy aura, they were not even comparable to this corpse watcher before him. However, since the Kunlun party could allow this person to guard the righteous grave here, he should not really be some kind of demon. Perhaps this kind of place was really too rich in Yin energy. After staying here for a long time, it would naturally become strange. Thinking of this, he felt some sympathy for this corpse watcher. However, he had always been a strong-willed person. After he nodded to the corpse watcher, he said, "Where is He Changsheng's body placed?" The corpse watcher raised his hand and pointed to a certain place in the courtyard. He looked at his movement. Not only was it slow, it was also abnormally stiff. He did not know whether it was like a human or a ghost. He could not help but ask, "What happened to your hand?" The corpse watcher was silent for a moment and said, "It's fake." He was startled. He took a closer look and indeed found that although the corpse watcher's hand looked no different from a normal person's, it was actually carved from a wooden block. This made him a little embarrassed. He took a deep breath and bowed his head slightly. He said, "I'm sorry." The corpse watcher's expression changed a little. He seemed to be a little surprised. After he took another look at He, his stiff gaze seemed to have softened a little. Then his voice rang out again. He said, "In that room." He looked in the direction he was pointing. He saw a dark room at the end of the courtyard. There were a few flickering candlelight inside. He nodded and said, "Thank you for your guidance, sir." Having said that, he stepped towards that direction. However, he had only taken a few steps when he suddenly heard the corpse watcher behind him say, "Hey, do you want to know how that person died?" He's body shook violently. He suddenly turned around. His eyes shone brightly. Chapter 146. Nameless Mountain's shadow was heavy, as if even the sun hated this place, and there was rarely any time for light to shine down. In this dark courtyard, amidst the eerie atmosphere, the corpse watcher's sudden words made he feel incredulous all of a sudden. "You know." He stared at the withered, shriveled face and said in a low voice. The zombie widened his mouth and let out a chuckle that sounded like a chuckle. However, his face didn't seem to be smiling at all. Even when he chuckled, the muscles beside his mouth twitched a little, making him look extremely stiff. He even felt that a person who had just died would be more pleasing to the eye than this corpse watcher, because he looked more like a dead person than a dead person. The aura of death that was so thick that it could not be dispersed seemed to be emanating from his body at all times. After hearing He's question, the corpse watcher smiled strangely and said in a hoarse voice, "I have a condition." "What condition?" "I want to see someone. Find him for me." "Who is it?" "Dong Fong Tao." "Dong Fong Tao?" He was stunned for a while before he suddenly reacted. "Oh, the one from Bai Chao Tang?" "That's right." He furrowed his brows and looked at the corpse watcher. "Why are you looking for him?" The corpse watcher was expressionless, looking like a lonely wild ghost standing in the dark courtyard. He said softly, "This has nothing to do with you." He was quiet for a moment, but then he shook his head and said, "I might not be able to do it. First, I'm not familiar with that master Uncle Dongfang, and we haven't been friends in the past. Now, we might even become enemies. Secondly, according to what I know, he has been in closed-door training for a long time due to his severe injuries. Until now, there are no signs of him coming out. Even his favorite disciple could not formally acknowledge him as her master. So, I don't think I can do anything about it." The corpse turned around and said coldly, "Then forget it. I've said what I want to say. It's up to you whether you want to do it or not." He suddenly took a step forward. His eyes flashed as he said, "I have the sect leader's warrant in my hand. Is that not enough to make you speak the truth?" The corpse watcher did not turn around and said, "The warrant only allows you to enter this courtyard. If you want to suppress me, you're not qualified. Why don't you ask Reverend Idlemonth to come to me directly?" He was speechless. Of course, he could not really summon Reverend Idlemonth to this dark place. As the head of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idlemonth had many things to do every day. Moreover, this matter was handed to He by the old man. He did not want to be. He took a deep look at the corpse watcher and said, "Of course the sect master won't come here, but I promise you that sooner or later, I will help you call Marshal Uncle Dongfang. But whether it will succeed or not, I cannot guarantee." The corpse watcher did not seem to be moved. He waved his hand and said coldly, "Before I see Dongfang Tao, I have nothing to say to you." After saying that, he walked away on his own. Soon, he walked to the other side of the courtyard. In the darkness, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. He took a deep breath. His expression changed several times. In the end, he decided to put this sudden interlude aside. He turned around and walked into the dark room with flickering candlelight. The eagle fruit tree liked light and moisture. It also liked to be nourished by abundant spiritual energy. It was a very delicate spiritual plant. It was not easy to raise. Because of its special properties, it was not easy to pick. It could be said to be a very troublesome plant. Lu Chen came to the Flying Goose Terrace. Basically, he lived and ate at the side of the spiritual field. He took care of the eagle fruit tree here. It could be considered as adding firewood to Su Qingjuan's exciting and dazzling cultivation career. Unfortunately, the eagle fruit tree liked sunlight. It never ripened at night. This allowed Lu Chen to at least sleep peacefully at night. Otherwise, not even a deity would be able to bear it if he could not rest all day long. On the first day he came here, Su Qingjun came to the side of the spiritual field to talk to him. Then she went back to her cave abode. He did not see her come out again that day. Lu Chen knew that Su Qingjun had a reputation for being obsessed with cultivation. Therefore, he was not surprised. He worked in the spiritual field until dusk. Then he finished his work for the day. When the sun was about to set, Lu Chen walked to the edge of the cliff of the Flying Goose Terrace. He looked into the distance and saw a sea of clouds. The sun had mostly fallen below the horizon. The remaining light plated the clouds with a layer of golden color. It was like a brilliant golden ocean. It was extraordinarily beautiful. The mountain wind blew in his face and his clothes fluttered. When he looked up at the sky from the cliff, he would feel a sense of relief. It was as if nothing in the world was important anymore. It was as if he was floating in the air. Perhaps this was the mentality of cultivation? Or perhaps it was precisely because of this that the ancient deities and virtuous deities of the past countless generations liked to stay in the heavenly abodes of the famous mountains and great rivers, watching the changes of the white clouds and the changing of the stars, and thus comprehending the real great Tao. Lu Chen looked at the blue sky in the distance and was lost in thought. The path he walked seemed to be different from everyone else in the world. Even if he saw the scenery of heaven and earth and the sea of clouds, he still could not understand the Tao that belonged to him, the path that belonged to him. The next morning, Lu Chen woke up early and went to the spiritual field to take a look. After one night, the 7 eagle fruit trees did not look any different from the day before. Some of the fruits hanging on the branches were still green and did not show any signs of ripening. It should be a few more days. After Lu Chen looked at it, he had an idea in his heart. He took the wooden bucket to the spring in the mountains and fetched 2 large buckets of clear spring water. First, he watered them, then he used his spiritual power to cultivate the trees. After this work, it was noon in the blink of an eye. He could finally take a breather. Lu Chen walked to the edge of the field and sat down. He glanced at the cave. This morning, Su Qingjun still did not come out of the cave. It seemed that this beautiful girl had made up her mind to stay in the cave and wait for Lu Chen to run over and call for her. Lu Chen smiled. He did not have any other grievances. After all, this was what they had agreed to do. He was sitting, calculating in his heart that at this moment in the Kunlun sect at the foot of the mountain, the news about He Changxing should have already spread. Most of the ordinary disciples might just be watching the fun, but if there was really a spy from the devil cult, it would be impossible for them to be indifferent to the reincarnation formation. Perhaps there would be some reaction? He squinted his eyes and thought quietly. Then he looked up at the sky and decided that tonight when it was quiet, maybe he should sneak down the mountain to take a look. Just as he was deep in thought, the quiet Fian platform suddenly heard a rush of footsteps from afar. Lu Chen was shocked. He turned his head and saw a man walking quickly up the mountain, heading straight for the door of the cave on the Fian platform. The spiritual field where Lu Chen was at was opened up at the side of the Fian platform. There were many ancient trees and rocks around it. Most of the area was hidden. In addition, the place was remote. If one did not look carefully, it would not be easy to notice this place. The man who came in a hurry obviously didn't notice that there was a spirit field 100 feet away from the cave residence. There was also a man standing there. Looking at his anxious expression, he ran to the gate and began to knock on the door. Bang 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 bang. The knocking sound was deep and clear, but it wasn't too loud. This was because the door of Su Qingjuan's residence was different from the houses at the foot of the mountain. It wasn't a wooden door, but a stone door that had been enchanted with a spell. A golden core cultivator, or rather, a young genius that everyone looked up to, coupled with a wealthy family background, was just that different from the masses. Lu Chen touched his chest pocket. There was a yellow stone talisman there. Su Qingjun had given it to him when they met yesterday. Its function was very simple. He could use this stone talisman to easily contact Su Qingjun. In her words, the stone door was thick and heavy, but the cave inside was big and deep. If someone was really looking for it, it would not be easy to hear them just by knocking on the door. Seeing that the man used all his strength to knock on the stone door for a long time, but there seemed to be no response from inside the cave, Lu Chen suddenly became happy. He felt a strange sense of superiority that made him despise the man who was still foolishly knocking on the door. Although he knew that this feeling was very boring, he could not help but laugh. He did not have the idea of running over to help. On the contrary, he even took 2 steps back and sat down with his back against the trunk of an eagle fruit tree. He did not mind the dirt on the ground. After all, he had been rolling here for the whole morning. He watched from afar as the man became more and more distressed, and his smile became more and more joyful. Finally, the man who knocked on the door seemed to be unable to endure it any longer. He suddenly shouted, "Sister June, Sister Qingyun, are you inside? I am Su Biao." Lu Chen listened from afar. He pursed his lips and shook his head. "Su Biao? This name is not good. Just call me Stupid Su." Su Biao waited outside for a long time, but the stone door still did not budge. Su Biao became even more anxious and paced around the cave entrance. It seemed that even his forehead was sweating. Suddenly, Su Biao seemed to have made up his mind. He knelt down in front of the cave entrance and kowtowed 3 times. Lu Chen, who was watching from afar, jumped in fright. He felt that things were getting more and more interesting. After a while, Su Biao pleaded loudly, "Sister June, please come out and see me. This little brother really has an urgent matter. I beg you to save me." "You want to save me?" Lu Chen looked over with interest. He touched the yellow stone talisman in his bosom, but after a moment of silence, he let go. "I want to see, when will she come out?" Before he could finish the last word, he suddenly heard the door of the cave on the other side rumble. The stone door moved open, and Su Biao, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly looked up, his face full of surprise. In the distance, Lu Chen was also startled. He subconsciously said, "He came out as soon as he heard help. It can't be such a coincidence, right?" Chapter 147. The stone door opened and a beautiful figure walked out from behind the thick shadow. It was Su Qingjun. She looked at Su Biao, who was kneeling outside the cave residence, and a look of surprise flashed across her face. "Su Biao, what are you doing?" Sister Qingjun, save me." Su Biao rushed forward and reached out to hug Su Qingjun's leg. Lu Chen's spirits rose as he watched from a distance. He thought to himself, is there something strange going on between these two? He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward. Unexpectedly, Su Qingjun's figure flashed and avoided Su Biao's hug. At the same time, her expression darkened as she said, "Sixth brother, what are you doing?" Su Biao was startled and seemed to realize that he was a bit rash. He shook his head desperately and said, I was wrong. Sister June, don't be angry. I really have an urgent matter." Su Qingjun snorted and her expression softened. "What's the matter? Say it." After a pause, she walked over and pulled him, saying, "Stand up and talk. You're a man, kneeling on the ground for no reason. What's the matter?" Su Biao stood up. His face was full of urgency as he grabbed Su Qingjun's hand and said, "Sister June, lend me 2,000 spiritual stones first." Su Qingjun's expression changed. "So much? What do you want?" Su Biao opened his mouth, but his expression suddenly became somewhat bashful. He couldn't explain the reason for a long time and only stammered, "I need it urgently. Can you lend me the money first?" Lu Chen was also interested in what he heard. He sat down on the ridge of the field and drank a spoonful of spring water from the bucket. This water was spring water from the mountains. It was sweet and delicious, making him feel like he was watching a show while drinking tea. At the same time, he said in a low voice, asking for 2,000 spiritual stones right off the bat. He really is from a grand family. So damn rich. On the other side, Su Qingjun asked for a long time, but Su Biao still refused to explain clearly. She seemed to be a little annoyed. She glared at him and said, "If you have something to say, tell me clearly. Otherwise, Why should I give you so much money? With a long face, Su Biao said, Elder Sister June, it's not like you don't know that our Su family has more than 100 disciples cultivating in the Kunlun party. However, more than half of our yearly offerings are given to you. If I don't ask for it from you, who else can I borrow it from? Su Qingjuan's complexion changed slightly, but she immediately sighed, looking a little apologetic. On the other hand, Lu Chen gasped from afar and said, My God, this isn't just an ordinary kind of favoritism. After a while, Su Qingjun opened her mouth and said, Sixth brother, you better tell me the whole story. If you really need my help, I will help you. Su Biao hesitated for a moment, then moved his head closer and whispered a few words in front of Su Qingjun. This time, Lu Chen didn't hear the important part clearly. He couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. He scooped up a spoonful of water and drank it angrily. He thought to himself that it must be a shameful thing to be so careful in a place with no one around. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly saw Su Qingjun raise her willowy eyebrows. Her face revealed a hint of anger and she said angrily, What? You want to use this money to redeem that prostitute? Su Biao was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Just as he was about to beg, the two of them suddenly heard a violent coughing sound coming from a place about 100 feet away. Su Qingjun and Su Biao turned their heads at the same time. They saw Lu Chen holding his chest and coughing at the edge of the spiritual field that was mostly covered by ancient trees and rocks. It seemed that he had choked while drinking water, but it also seemed that he was struggling to not laugh out loud. His face was full of pain. Who is it? How dare you? Su Biao jumped 30 feet high, his face full of anger. He pointed at Lu Chen and shouted angrily, Where did this brat come from? How dare you hide on this flying goose platform? As he said this, his expression suddenly changed and he shouted, You bastard, don't tell me you are so daring in your lust that you covet my sister June's beauty? Bah, watch me beat you to death today, then throw you down from this mountain. Lu Chen coughed and waved his hand. At the same time, he kept shaking his head. His expression looked a little strange. Su Biao was furious. Just as he was about to rush over and beat up this ignorant odd-job disciple, he was stopped by Su Qingjun from the side. She said, Enough. Su Biao stopped and turned around to look at her. He only heard Su Qingjun say coldly, He is an odd-job disciple from Bai Chao Tang. He is here to help me. He will be staying on this mountain for a while. Su Biao was startled. His expression suddenly became a little awkward. When he looked at the spiritual field again, he found that Lu Chen had actually disappeared in just a short while. He must have felt a little awkward when he saw this scene. He didn't want to embarrass Su Qingjun, so he left first. Su Qingjun also looked at the spiritual field. Her clear eyes didn't show much strangeness, but she also let out a faint sigh of relief. Su Biao, on the other hand, saw that there was no one around, so he ran back to Su Qingjuan's side. He begged desperately in a low voice and bowed with his hands folded in front. In the end, he even looked like he was about to kneel down. This scared Su Qingjun so much that she pulled him back and scolded him harshly. However, Su Biao didn't care at all. He seemed to be very thick-skinned and kept pestering Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun scolded him and hit him. In the end, she seemed to be helpless. After being pestered by Su Biao for more than 2 hours, she finally waved her hand and stuffed something into his hand. Then, Su Biao ran away happily. From the window of the thatched hut, Lu Chen watched Su Biao's figure disappear like a wisp of smoke. He lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling with both hands on the pillow. After a while, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. He seemed to have thought of something. He pondered silently and then sighed softly. Why are you sighing? Outside the thatched hut, Su Qingjuan's voice suddenly sounded. Lu Chen stood up and walked over to open the door. He saw her standing outside, a pair of bright eyes looking at Lu Chen. Lu Chen smiled and said, How did you eavesdrop? I didn't eavesdrop. Su Qingjun said, I just wanted to come over and ask you something. But after reaching the Jin Dan realm, my ears are too sensitive. I can hear your voice from outside the hut. Lu Chen looked at her and smiled bitterly. He nodded and said, All right. Su Qingjun looked at him and said, "You saw everything just now?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, "I heard. Young Master Su didn't notice that I was here before, so I didn't restrain myself too much." Su Qingjun frowned with some annoyance and then said, "Can you not tell others? Otherwise, this matter will not be good for Sixth Brother's reputation." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Of course, I will definitely not say half a word about this to others." "All right." Su Qingjun seemed to believe him and then turned to leave. But her body had only turned halfway when she suddenly stopped. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "You coughed just now. Were you laughing at him?" Lu Chen immediately shook his head and said, "No, I just choked on water." Su Qingjun stared at him. Lu Chen was speechless. He shrugged and said, "All right, I think it's a little funny. I didn't expect that a person like young Master Su of the Su family would actually like that kind of woman, and even want to die for her." Su Qingjun seemed to have the same feeling. She also shook her head slightly and sighed, saying, "You also feel that there is no true love to speak of for that kind of woman, right?" Lu Chen suddenly became silent and didn't speak for a long time. Su Qingjun at first only sighed and didn't think too much about it. She planned to leave after saying that. Who knew that Lu Chen's reaction was a little strange? She couldn't help but look at him again and said, "What is it?" Lu Chen softly exhaled and said, "I think it's not completely like that." Su Qingjun raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "What do you mean?" "Prostitutes are also people. Naturally, they also have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Although I don't dare to be sure, but I think, maybe at some time, those women also have a little bit of sincerity towards someone." Su Qingjun looked deeply at him. A strange expression flashed across her face and said, "I didn't think that you would actually think of those women like that." "Those women?" Lu Chen smiled and stood there, looking straight at Su Qingjun's suddenly somewhat cold gaze, but he didn't retreat or shrink back. It seemed that Su Qingjun didn't want to talk about this matter with Lu Chen anymore. She turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But after a few steps, she suddenly heard Lu Chen say behind her, "No matter what you think, and you indeed have the qualifications to look down on those prostitutes, but I still want to say, although those women are lowly, they really are also people. There will also be times when they will have sincerity." Su Qingjun didn't turn around, so Lu Chen couldn't see her expression at the moment, and he also didn't know if she would be angry at these somewhat presumptuous words at this moment. After a while, Su Qingjun opened her mouth. Her voice was calm and didn't seem to have much fluctuation. She only asked lightly, "Then have you seen that kind of woman's sincerity?" "I have seen it," Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun was silent for a moment, then said, "Very good." After that, she continued to walk forward. Lu Chen looked at her back, suddenly raised his voice, and said, "Also, although I believe that there will be sincerity in the prostitutes, that kind of thing is also very, very rare. Whether young Master Su has this kind of luck to meet such a woman with sincerity, I think it is very doubtful. And even if there is sincerity, whether or not it is in your brother, it is also difficult to say." Su Qingjun coldly snorted, finally stopped again, turned around, and looked a little unhappy. She stared at Lu Chen and said, "After talking for so long, what exactly do you want to say?" Lu Chen said, "What I mean is, it is very rare to meet such a kind of sincerity. Why don't you go and get those 2,000 spiritual stones back?" Su Qingjun looked at him. After a moment, she lightly said, "I won't." Lu Chen said, "Why is that?" Su Qingjun said, "I want to eat the eagle fruit, so I can't go down the mountain." Lu Chen said, "Oh, that's true, but it's a bit of a pity." Su Qingjun said, "It's nothing, just a little bit of money. Just think of it as feeding the dogs." Lu Chen. Chapter 148. As Lu Chen sat in the straw hut, he recalled the conversation he had with Su Qingjun and suddenly felt that Atsu was quite pitiful. If he really took out 2,000 spirit stones and threw it out, would there be people who would want to be dogs? Well, this was not a question that he could think about in detail. Lu Chen hurriedly cast this thought aside. Then, in the following time, he either went to the spiritual fields outside the hut to take care of the eagle fruit tree, or he casually walked around the area and looked at the beautiful scenery of the Flying Goose Terrace. He watched the clouds and the sky as vast as the sea. He was prepared to wait like this until the sky turned dark, then find an opportunity to go down the mountain to see if there would be any unexpected gains from the trap he had set. But unexpectedly, this seemingly quiet Flying Goose Terrace was unexpectedly visited by more people before dusk, and it was not just one person. There were two groups of 3 people in total. The first group was people that Lu Chen knew. They were Sumo and Su Qian, who had a conflict with He Changsheng and the others in the Fragrance Garden. In view of the previous incident, although Su Qingjun did not show any particularly obvious dissatisfaction, Lu Chen still consciously hid in the straw hut further away. He could not hear the conversation over there, and could only see a little bit of the situation over there through the gap in the window. Similar to the scene when Su Biao came, Sumo and Su Qian also waited at the door for a long time. After about an hour, Su Qingjun finally came to open the door. This slow reaction made Lu Chen almost suspect that Su Qingjun had really reached the Jindan realm and had good hearing and sight. Or perhaps this woman's words and actions did not match, and she was actually trying to show her strength to these people? This is a little strange. Lu Chen leaned against the window and watched curiously. Even if they were family, Su Qingjuan's place was completely different from what he'd imagined. She'd only focused on cultivation every day, but it was really different from what he'd imagined. After Su Qingjun came out, she still looked as cold and beautiful as ever. Sumo and Su Qian also seemed to be very respectful towards this big sister, and hurriedly bowed to her. Then, the 3 of them began to talk at the entrance of the cave. Seeing this, Lu Chen suddenly frowned and exclaimed. Something didn't seem right. Including Su Biao in front of him, these people were all his blood brothers. Logically speaking, he should at least invite them into the cave abode to drink tea and talk quietly, right? But why were all of them just standing outside the cave? Looking at the expressions of Sumo and Su Qian, it seemed that they were used to this. It seemed that this was the rule of Su Qingjuan's place. Lu Chen looked at the cave abode behind Su Qingjun from afar. He saw that behind the stone door was deep and unfathomable, and he basically couldn't see anything. The 3 of them talked for a while. Su Qian was slightly better, but Sumo had an excited expression on her face. She said many things to Su Qingjun, and in the middle, she gesticulated and begged for a while. Su Qingjun, on the other hand, frowned, nodded and shook her head from time to time, and occasionally revealed a helpless expression. In the end, Su Qingjun finally waved her hand. She first said something to Su Qian, and then sternly reprimanded Sumo. However, the 2 of them had a happy expression on their faces, and laughed out loud. After repeatedly thanking Su Qingjun, they quickly left. Su Qingjun turned around and returned to the cave abode. But not long after the stone door closed, Lu Chen was lying peacefully in the straw hut, waiting for the sky to turn dark. Suddenly he heard movement outside. He was stunned for a moment, and climbed up to take a look. He then muttered, "It can't be, why is it so lively?" In just a short while, another person came up from the foot of the mountain. In a flash, he also ran to the entrance of Su Qingjuan's cave abode. With a put-ong sound, he directly knelt down, and then hugged the door, banging and shouting with all his might. Even Lu Chen, who was so far away, could hear a few indistinct words. "Elder sister Jun. Elder sister, you must seek justice." Lu Chen, who was in the straw hut next to him, could clearly see that the 3rd person who came was a girl. She was very young, and looked to be 1 or 2 years younger than Su Qingjun. When she came, her footsteps were light, and her expression was calm. Once she was near the entrance of the cave abode, she immediately revealed a sorrowful expression, and 2 streams of tears flowed down her face. What was even more strange was that after this girl knocked on the stone door for a while, she suddenly seemed to remember something. She suddenly reached out to her shoulder, and grabbed the lapel of her clothes. She forcefully tore it and immediately tore a hole. Then she lay at the entrance of the cave, and cried even louder. This time, because it wasn't too long since Sumo and Su Qian left, Su Qingjun came out much faster than before. After a while, she heard the rumbling sound of the stone door opening. As soon as Su Qingjun walked out, She saw the girl kneeling in front of her. Her clothes were disheveled, and her face was full of tears. She was instantly shocked, and hurriedly went up to the girl. She used both hands to help the girl up, and then asked repeatedly, her face revealing a worried and anxious expression. In the distance, Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh out loud. He looked at the straw hut with great interest. He shook his head and said to himself with a smile, "The people in the Su family are quite interesting." Because Lu Chen had gone to the Flying Goose Terrace to help Su Qingjun plant the eagle fruit tree, and he would be gone for at least 20 days, Black Dog became a problem. Lu Chen had originally asked people if he could bring Atsu to the Flying Goose Terrace, and those who were asked looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. How could a fairy-like person like Su Qingjun be together with a dog? Lu Chen was also speechless. Later, he asked around for a while and found that the situation might be true. Girls from aristocratic families like Su Qingjun and EXN had basically never had much contact with pets since they were young, so it was hard to say whether they would like Atsu from the bottom of their hearts like EXN did. It would be too troublesome if more problems arose because of this. Anyway, they would only be staying for 20 days, so after Lu Chen thought about it, Black Dog began a lonely life as a dog. Every day, it would run out on its own, take care of its own food, drink, and defecate. When it was dark, it would run back on its own, crawl into the house through the small dog hole and sleep. EXN did think of it, so she specially ran over to see Atu. When they met, EXN was shocked. Seeing Atu's miserable appearance, she couldn't bear to look at it. She immediately burst into tears. But compared to EXIN's sadness, Atsu seemed to be much stronger. It looked indifferent all day long, even though it only had one eye and half a tail, and there were many terrible wounds on its body. But these wounds seemed to be unable to stop Atsu's yearning for the mountains and forests, even if EXN begged. For a long time, except for Lu Chen, Atsu had almost never been close to humans. EXIN was an exception, and she could talk to it a little bit. But every time EXIN wanted to take Atsu away, Atsu firmly refused. It seemed it would rather go back to that cold and lonely house every night and sleep alone, but it also seemed to have incomparable patience, quietly waiting for Lu Chen's return. Unconsciously, this black dog's life and Lu Chen's seemed to have become intertwined, and it was unwilling to be separated. The setting sun shone on Kunwu City. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on a secluded courtyard. This was an unremarkable place in Kunwu City. It had been bought a long time ago, and then it was left alone for a long time. It wasn't until a few days ago that someone suddenly moved in. Since the day the new owner moved in, he had been living in seclusion, almost never going out. The neighbors hadn't seen him for such a long time, nor had anyone come to visit him. The courtyard's gate was so lonely and quiet, as if it wasn't a person living inside, but a soul of nothingness. Until one day, a man suddenly came here, walked into this secluded courtyard, and forcibly pulled the person hiding in the dark outside, letting the rays of the setting sun shine on his body. In the light of the setting sun, that person let out strange roars and sounds of resentment. His entire face was hideous and ugly, like torn rotten meat, and he looked more like a ghost than a human. He forcefully threw his younger brother to the ground. A trace of pain and regret flashed in the depths of his eyes, but his face was filled with extreme anger. He even raised his foot and ruthlessly kicked Hegang a few times. Hegang rolled on the ground, screaming a few times, but he didn't dare to resist in the slightest. Or perhaps it was because he had long lost hope in himself. In front of his only elder brother in the world, he was like a wailing wild dog, shedding painful tears. "What are you crying for?" He suddenly let out a low roar, grabbed Hegang's shirt by the chest, lifted him up, and directly slapped his face. Hegang was slapped until the corner of his mouth was bleeding, but he still didn't make a sound. Looking at He in the eyes, there seemed to be only numbness left. "Just beat me to death, big brother." He looked at his handsome, perfect, and his only elder brother in the world, and said bitterly, I only brought shame to you, and even caused you to be insulted and punished. In the end, you were even driven out of the Kunlun party like a dog. Big brother, don't worry about me, let me die." He Yi's face was livid, and he slapped Hegang again, causing him to roll on the ground. Then he grabbed him back, and his eyes seemed to be emitting fire. He glared at him and shouted, "Look at yourself, what have you become now? If you weren't my brother, I would really want to kill you with one slap." Gang smiled bitterly. "If my death can free you, can let you be valued and cultivated by the sect again, then what's the harm in my death?" Tears kept flowing down from the corner of his eyes, and he choked, "I have a rotten life. It's fine if I end up like this today, but big brother, you clearly have a great future, but I have implicated you, He snorted coldly, but the gaze in the depths of his eyes finally softened. He walked to the side of the stone steps and sat down, then sneered, "Why do you think I was able to come out of seclusion, and then come down the mountain to find you?" Gang was stunned, and then his eyes slowly lit up with a glimmer of light. Chapter 149. His hideous face suddenly trembled. He glared at he and said, "Big brother, could it be that you?" He nodded slowly, then looked at Gang and said, "The heavens have taken pity on me. I suddenly have a rare opportunity to escape from my current predicament. However, I need you to help me." Gang suddenly sat up with excitement in his eyes. He said, "That's great, but..." His expression suddenly dimmed as he said, "But how can I help you in my current state?" Before he could finish speaking, he had already interrupted him, and then said in a resolute tone, "You are my only brother in this world, and I only trust you." Gang's body trembled. He stared at he in a daze. Gradually, his hideous face seemed to brighten up. Even his gaze became somewhat gentle. He clenched his teeth and knelt in front of he. He said, "Big brother, if there's anything you want me to do, I'll do it even if I have to risk my life." He glanced at him with a gratified expression in his eyes. He then shook his head and said, "You don't have to risk your life, but you have to pay attention to hiding your tracks. For example, when you go out, change your clothes, wear a mask, or something like that. Don't let anyone recognize you." As he spoke, he took out a package from behind him and threw it to Gang. He said, "I've prepared everything inside for you. After you go back, dress up a bit and go to all the big shops in the city." Gang caught the package. Suddenly, his eyes flashed and revealed a bit of fierceness. He said, "Big brother, are there still people on the mountain watching you?" He sneered and said, "There are many people watching us. They can't wait for me to do something wrong and fall. There's no need to pay attention to them. However, I can't allow anyone to disturb me with what I want to do. It's a bit inconvenient for me to go out myself, so I need you to help me. Rest assured, big brother. I'll definitely do a good job. However, you want me to go to all the big shops in Kunwa City because..." He took out a small paper bag from his pocket and handed it to Gang. Gang received it with some doubt. He first glanced at then opened the folded paper. There was some scarlet powder in the center of the paper bag. He looked at it carefully, then brought it to his nose and sniffed it. Then he said in surprise, "Cinnabar?" "Yes, you will pretend to be a wealthy customer, and then ask around to find out which shops have been in the city recently, and who has bought this thing in large quantities." Gang nodded, put away the paper bag and said, "I understand." He smiled faintly and stood up. He raised his head and looked at the setting sun in the distance. His gaze was deep. A moment later, he suddenly laughed coldly and said, "The reincarnation formation needs a lot of cinnabar." Due to the high terrain, the setting sun on Kunlun Mountain actually stayed in sight longer than it did in Kunwa City. Flying Goose Terrace on Ziyun Peak was a good place to admire the setting sun. The sea of clouds was magnificent, and the afterglow illuminated the sky. The beautiful scenery was enchanting. However, at dusk, no one on Flying Goose Terrace was in the mood to admire the setting sun. The woman who ran to Flying Goose Terrace seemed to be a member of the Su family. At least, Su Qingjun seemed to be very familiar with her. During the tearful complaint, the woman seemed to be saying something to Su Qingjun. It seemed like she was complaining, but it also seemed like she was reprimanding someone. In the end, her eyes were filled with tears. Su Qingjun's attitude towards this woman was different from how she treated Su Biao, Sumo, Su Qian, and the others. She was obviously more sympathetic. But later, When the woman seemed to make a request to Su Qingjun revealed an awkward expression. Lu Chen watched this scene with interest. He recalled the woman's light footsteps and calm expression when she went up the mountain. It formed a sharp contrast with her current appearance of begging with tears streaming down her face. The two women seemed to be in a deadlock. Su Qingjun sighed and said a few words to the woman, pointing at the spiritual fields on this side. Although Lu Chen couldn't hear what she said, he could clearly guess that Su Qingjun was defending him for the eagle fruits. She was referring to him not being able to go down the mountain. Who would have thought that after the woman heard this, she would cry even harder? She even hugged Su Qingjun's waist and rubbed her head against her, looking like she was about to die. Su Qingjun's face immediately revealed an awkward expression. She softly advised the woman for a while, but it seemed to be useless. In the end, she seemed to be forced into a corner and shook her head with a bitter smile. She softly said a few words to the woman. The woman's face suddenly revealed a happy expression. She suddenly stood up as if her wish had finally been fulfilled. After hugging Su Qingjun tightly, she immediately walked down the mountain. She walked hurriedly and quickly, as if she was afraid that Su Qingjun would call her back and regret her decision. Su Qingjun silently watched the woman's figure gradually disappear into the distance. Her face also revealed a faint trace of helplessness. In the distance, in the thatched hut, Lu Chen withdrew his gaze and lay down on the bed. He began to close his eyes and rest. The light outside the hut gradually dimmed. It was probably the time for the sun to finally set. Night was coming. It was also at this time that a burst of light footsteps suddenly came from outside the thatched hut, passing by the side of the hut. At this moment, there were only two people on the Flying Goose Terrace. Other than Lu Chen, there was also Su Qingjun. The sky was already dark. Why didn't she return to the cave residence? Why did she come here? Lu Chen sat up and looked outside the hut. He slightly frowned. After a moment of silence, he opened the door of the thatched hut and walked out. The night was about to turn dark. The setting sun in the distance was only left with a golden edge, as if it was still longing for the last bit of light in this world. On the edge of the cliff of the Flying Goose Terrace, there were layers upon layers of black shadows. It was as if the shadows came from all directions. On top of the rocks, Su Qingjun stood alone. The mountain wind blew past, and her clothes fluttered in the wind. She was like a thin leaf that could be blown away by the wind at any time. She was also like a small pine tree planted on the edge of the cliff. No matter how the wind, knives, frost, swords, and time attacked her, under the night sky, she had a feeling that she had weathered the frost and was still fresh in the face of snow. Her figure, like a whisper in the night, was so beautiful that it did not seem like the quiet time of the human world. And looking into the distance, was there some sadness in her eyes? Lu Chen slowly walked over, but when he was about 10 feet away from the figure of the woman, he suddenly stopped. After looking carefully for a while, he turned around again, looking like he wanted to walk back to the thatched hut. "Why don't you come over?" Su Qingjun's calm voice came from behind. Even though she did not turn around, she seemed to be able to clearly feel what was happening behind her. Lu Chen stopped and looked at her. He saw that Su Qingjun still had the same appearance as before. What he saw was only a beautiful and deep back. "Well, actually, I was a little worried that you would take things too hard and want to jump down," Lu Chen said very calmly, "but now it seems that everything is fine. I was thinking too much, so I plan to go back to sleep now." Su Qingjun's figure moved slightly, and then she turned around to look at Lu Chen. The expression on her face looked a little strange. She said, "You think I want to jump down?" Lu Chen did not seem to be embarrassed at all. He said seriously, "I think the wrong way. I am sorry." Hearing these words, Su Qingjun shook her head and was silent for a moment. Suddenly she said, "Everyone who came today is from our Su family. You also saw them, right?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "I saw them all." But at the beginning, because Su Biao was close, he had a rough idea of what was going on. "I was at the thatched hut after that, so I didn't hear anything. I don't know what happened." Su Qingjun nodded slightly. Looking at Lu Chen, her gaze softened a little. After a moment, she said, You can take the initiative to avoid it and save me some embarrassment. Thank you. Lu Chen looked up and down at Su Qingjun. He thought that this woman was really different from others. Not to mention her beautiful appearance, her exquisite mind was even more clever. She could hear three things from one thing. There was a trace of admiration in his eyes. Then he said, "It is late at night. Shiji Su, be careful. The wind here is cold and dew is heavy. Take care of yourself. I will go back first. The scenery here is very good." Su Qingjun seemed not to hear Lu Chen's words. She said to herself, "The sea of clouds billows like a vast ocean. It is a rare beautiful scenery. In the night, it is a different scene than in the day. Don't you want to see it?" Lu Chen stopped and looked at Su Qingjun. He suddenly smiled. He did not decline, nor did he show any humility. He just nodded and said, "Thank you." Then he walked up the cliff. Below the cliff was steep. As soon as he walked up, he felt the mountain wind suddenly become much fiercer. The whistling sound was endless, as if it came from the 9 heavens and swept down to the earth. Thick clouds were under his feet. They were vast and boundless, reaching into the depths of the blue dome of heaven. Smoke and dust rose and fell like waves. Where the wind and clouds were, the world was vast. When he looked back, he saw a bright moon rising slowly. It was late at night. He stood by her side. When they stood side by side, their clothes fluttered like messy waves. The feeling of the strong wind brushing against their faces, as if there was a pair of wings under their ribs. Su Qingjun turned around and glanced at him. Her expression was calm, devoid of joy or sorrow. Lu Chen didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the distant sea of clouds, watching the faint moonlight illuminate the vast sea of clouds. It was a magnificent and wondrous scene. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, "It really is a beautiful scene." Su Qingjun smiled slightly. She was as beautiful as a lily in the night. Then she also turned to look. The two of them looked at the sea of clouds under the moonlight. They stood together for a long time. Until the moon was in the middle of the sky, Su Qingjun looked away. After a moment, she suddenly said, "I want to go down the mountain tonight." Lu Chen looked into the distance. There was no expression on his face. He said lightly, "It is not worth it." Chapter 150. The night wind blew. On the cliff, Su Qingjuan's eyes were clear and bright, like the bright moon hanging high in the sky at this moment, cold but not dazzling. She seemed to have a trace of curiosity. She looked at Lu Chen and asked, "Why do you say that?" "There's a curfew." Lu Chen said, "If someone finds out, your good reputation will be ruined." Su Qingjun looked at him for a moment and suddenly smiled. She said, "No, what you said just now, that's not what you meant." Then she paused and said, "Could it be that you have already guessed the reason why they came to me today? Except for Su Biao, I still don't know about other people's matters." Lu Chen once again expressed his attitude to Su Qingjun and said, "But I think that most of their matters should not be very urgent. At least for you, perhaps it is not worth breaking the sect rules and going to Kunlun at night." Su Qingjun was silent for a moment and suddenly asked, "Have you ever thought that perhaps it is really a small matter for me, but for others, it may become a big urgent matter?" Lu Chen said, "So you want to go down the mountain?" Su Qingjun nodded and said, "They asked me to do something." "They asked you, and you agreed? After all, we are a family." Lu Chen frowned and looked at Su Qingjun without saying anything for a moment. Su Qingjun was also silent for a moment and said, "When Su Biao was here, you may have heard those words. There are too many things in the house and only I have them. If I don't take care of my brothers and sisters, who will take care of them?" Lu Chen blinked and suddenly looked left and right. Then he looked at the dark abyss at the bottom of the cliff not far away. He seemed to feel a little guilty. Su Qingjun was a little surprised and said, "What's wrong with you?" Lu Chen said, "I want to see if there is a way to escape. Maybe you will kill me later." Su Qingjun was stunned at first, then she burst out laughing and said, "Nonsense, why would I do that?" Lu Chen also laughed and said, "In fact, with your identity, you don't need to say so much to a servant disciple like me." Su Qingjuan's eyes flashed like the moonlight in the sky, and she smiled and said, I think you are different from ordinary servant disciples. You are especially smart. After a pause, she seemed to feel that she had not said enough and added, well, you are smarter than many Qi cultivation realm and even foundation building realm disciples I know. Lu Chen immediately took a step back and looked Su Qingjun up and down. He said seriously, you must have something to ask of me. Do you have something to say? Su Qingjun sighed and said, you are indeed a smart person, much better than the brothers in my family. If they were a little more like you, I would not be so annoyed. Lu Chen smiled and said, if your words were to spread, I would not be able to stay on Kunlun Mountain. What are you trying to say? Su Qingjun said calmly, after I go down the mountain, I may not be able to come back in time tomorrow morning. Then, if someone comes looking for me but finds that I am missing, and at the same time, because of the eagle fruit, I should be guarding this flying goose platform to my death. This will be very troublesome. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he suddenly smiled bitterly and said, you want me to help you stop people? Su Qingjun said frankly, yes, I have no choice. Right now, there are only the two of us on this flying goose platform, and the eagle fruit tree is there. Even if I go down the mountain, I can't hide it from you, so I can only ask you to help me cover up. Lu Chen nodded and said, no wonder you said such trivial things to me earlier. Su Qingjun said, how about it, can you help me? Lu Chen shook his head and said, I am only an odd job disciple, I don't have that ability. Before he could finish, Su Qingjun had already interrupted him and said, you, as an odd job disciple, are much better than them. I think you can do it. Lu Chen gritted his teeth in distress and said, this flying goose platform has always been quiet, maybe no one will come even after half a day. He suddenly looked at Su Qingjun and frowned, do many people usually come here? Not really, sometimes there are many, sometimes there are only a few days without seeing anyone. Lu Chen snorted and said, there are quite a lot of people. It's a big family. All right. Lu Chen shook his head helplessly, then straightened his expression and said, then there is one last thing. Speak. What if the eagle fruit suddenly ripens tomorrow morning? Su Qingjun suddenly fell silent and did not speak for a long time. Lu Chen did not rush her and only looked at her quietly. After a while, Su Qingjun frowned her delicate and beautiful eyebrows and said, why don't you eat it? Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said unhappily, hey, if someone sees this, I'm afraid they will really beat me to death and throw me off this cliff, okay? Su Qingjun looked a little distressed and even used her hand to rub the space between her eyebrows, as if she also felt that this matter was a little troublesome. Then she said to Lu Chen with a somewhat resentful tone, didn't you say that the eagle fruit won't ripen so soon? Lu Chen coughed and said, what if? Su Qingjun thought for a long time and finally waved her hand and sighed. If it's really that unlucky, you can just bury it in the soil and use it as fertilizer. Just don't let anyone see it. All right. Su Qingjun turned around and was about to leave, but at this moment, Lu Chen suddenly called out to her. Su Qingjun turned to look at him and said, is there anything else? Lu Chen said, you forgot to mention the reward. Su Qingjun was startled and said, what reward? Lu Chen looked at her with a strange gaze and said, if I help you with this matter, it's quite risky. Don't you need to give me some reward for helping you with such a favor? I see. Su Qingjun seemed to have a sudden realization and said, so that's what you think. That's fine too. Hey, this should be a matter of course, okay? Lu Chen said to Su Qingjun seriously. Su Qingjun said indifferently, maybe. But in the past, no matter if they're from the Su family or not, they've never asked for anything in return when they help me. At most, I'll just thank them, and they'll be very happy. I'm different from them. Lu Chen snorted coldly and seemed to express some contempt and disdain for those people in the past. Then he said seriously, actually, think about it. Those people said they didn't want your reward, but in fact, they made you owe them a favor. Favors are the most difficult to repay. If they come to you in the future, will you help them or not? When you help them, will it be more tiring than directly giving them some spirit stones? Su Qingjun carefully thought about it, and after a moment, a hint of agreement appeared on her face. She nodded and said, "What you said is very reasonable." "That's right." Lu Chen laughed and said, "I'm doing this for your sake. I don't want you to owe me a debt of gratitude and feel bad." Su Qingjun said, "Well, then how much do you want?" Lu Chen thought about it and secretly thought, "Won't I cut you in half and make you bleed?" Then he made up his mind, gritted his teeth, and stamped his feet. He tentatively asked, 2,000 spirit stones? But Su Qingjun nodded and looked at Lu Chen with appreciation. She said, "I didn't expect you to be such a kind person. You have a good character." The night was vast and dark. The beautiful woman took advantage of the night and quietly disappeared into the boundless darkness. Lu Chen stood on the edge of the cliff, facing the wind. The mountain wind made his clothes flutter, and the biting cold wind swept across his face from time to time. He always felt like he was being slapped in the face. When he looked at the night sky and the bright moon in the sky, he did not know why he felt a sense of loss. Lu Chen let out a long sigh, a look of regret on his face as he muttered to himself. He said to himself, "If I had known, I would have said 20,000. These rich people are really hateful." As he said this, he shook his head and turned around to walk down the cliff. He walked all the way back to his hut and closed the door. The night gradually darkened. In the blink of an eye, about 2 hours had passed. Suddenly, there was a slight movement in the cold darkness on Fian platform. The door of the hut was silently pushed open, and then Lu Chen walked out. Under the moonlight, his figure was never in the light, but hidden in the shadows. He was faintly discernible, moving vaguely toward the mountain road below Fian platform. Not long after, his figure also disappeared into the darkness. That night, Kunlun Mountain was still cold and quiet. Most of the Kunlun disciples had long been accustomed to this kind of work and rest due to the constant curfew for many years. Although there were still guards outside the house where a horrifying murder had occurred a few days ago, it was obvious that the guards were much more relaxed than before. Even people who practice Taoism would feel uncomfortable in the face of death or the dead. Of course, it was a different story for those who cultivated the evil arts of demons and devils. Lu Chen's figure quietly came to the outside of the house that originally belonged to He Changxing. He hid in the woods far away and then quietly looked over there. At least from the outside, the house did not seem to have changed. It was as if the indignant servant disciple was still living in it, dissatisfied with many things in this world. The terrifying aura of the strange formation that once existed in the house seemed to be blocked by the walls, not revealing any secrets to the outside world. Lu Chen hid in the woods for a long time. He did not seem to have any intention of sneaking into the house to investigate. He only quietly looked over there, a complicated light flashing in his eyes, as if he was thinking about something. Did the person hiding in the deepest part of the darkness already know what happened here? If he was a spy of the evil sect, then what would he do? If he saw such a pure reincarnation formation, what would he think? Lu Chen's gaze slowly flickered. Suddenly, he moved away from the house and looked towards the east side of the house. In the darkness of the night, there also seemed to be a dense and wide forest. In the darkness of the night, he coldly stared at the house on this side. Chapter 151. The shadow moved stealthily in the darkness, moving away from its original location without a sound, and then headed towards its destination. Meanwhile, the disciples guarding outside the house in front of it were completely oblivious to it. To the east of the hut was an extremely vast forest that extended all the way to the nearest mountain peak. In the night, this forest seemed especially quiet and deep. Lu Chen's figure stepped into the forest, blended into the darkness, quietly looked at the surroundings and then started to walk deeper into the forest. His mouth trembled slightly, as if he was secretly repeating something. At the same time, he would occasionally turn back to look at the direction of the house, as if adjusting his direction according to the position there. Eastern. Life Gate. Divine. Lord. His eyes were bright and sharp, as if he was carefully identifying the direction in that strange and obscure formula, trying hard to find something. The night was deep, The forest was also deep and dim, but Lu Chen seemed to be like a fish in water, unusually adapted to this environment. He walked steadily. After several zhongs deep into the forest, he suddenly stopped. His hand gently raised, fingers slightly flexed, as if slowly calculating something in the air. Very quickly, his eyes suddenly lit up. That finger also stopped pointing at a certain direction. That was somewhere deep in the forest. That place did not look any different, just that there were many very dense trees. It was a stretch of darkness, perhaps even darker than other places. As if it was hiding a secret, quietly waiting in this deep night. Lu Chen took a step forward, but he suddenly paused in midair and slowly retracted his foot. He stood in the darkness, watching that stretch of deep darkness from afar, as if he had fallen into a sudden silence. There was no murderous aura, no danger, no warning signs or signs that could cause alarm. That place ahead seemed no different from the surroundings, only hiding that secret, waiting for him to go over and discover. But Lu Chen still stood there motionless. He coldly looked at that place for a very long time. If he wanted to lure the snake out of its hole, then, after seeing the evil sect formation in that house, would there also be someone, similarly wanting to know who he was, wanting to find him? Very few people knew about the top and strange methods of the devil cult, but those who knew were definitely not ordinary people. Could such a person have also set up some unpredictable traps? Lu Chen was like a shadow, quietly standing in the darkness. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly turned around and quietly walked away without looking back, not even sparing a glance at the darkness. The night was deep and no one knew what had happened in the boundless darkness. Only the swaying and silent shadows floated around in the sky, adding a bit of desolation to the night. The first rays of the morning sun shone down from the sky, illuminating the thatched hut on the Purple Cloud Peak's Flying Goose platform. Lu Chen yawned, stretched his body, and rested on the bed for a while. Then he lazily got up, opened the door, and walked out. It was really comfortable to have no one to care about him. He was the only one on the huge fairyland-like Flying Goose platform. Even though the most important stone door on the other side of the mountain wall was tightly shut, at least for this morning, this place seemed to belong to him alone. The fresh morning breeze blew over from the sea of clouds on the other side of the cliff, bringing with it a moist and gentle scent. It felt very comfortable on his face. The verdant trees on the mountain swayed with the wind, as if they were also smiling. The sound of birds chirping and rustling was like an ancient and elegant song, intoxicating people. Lu Chen strolled from one side to the other, openly and unscrupulously looking around the entire Flying Goose platform that he did not have the time to visit yesterday, memorizing all the terrain and roads in his heart. Then, he walked back to the side of the spiritual field, and carefully looked at the eagle fruit trees. There seemed to be no change in the situation. There was no eagle fruit that suddenly made things difficult for Su Qingjun, forcing them to suddenly ripen this morning. Of course, after a day of spiritual power cultivation and growth, these eagle fruits were still a little bigger than yesterday. The immaturity had faded a little, and there was a little red on them. Perhaps they would not ripen today, but there was no telling tomorrow. No matter what, he still had to do the work that needed to be done. He could not leave these eagle fruit trees alone when Su Qingjun was not on the mountain. But no matter how he looked at it, in such a place that looked like a holy land for cultivation, it was really putting the cart before the horse if he did not cultivate and instead lay in the mud to plant trees. Lu Chen sighed, looked around at the beautiful scenery, and shrugged. Who asked you to be a servant disciple? The mountain forest was quiet, and the scenery was beautiful. Time flew by without him realizing it. Lu Chen finished his work in the spirit field. His hands were black, and his body was covered in a lot of black mud. He looked up at the sky and saw that the sun had risen quite a bit. It seemed that in another 2 hours, the morning would be over. It's still quite quiet, no one came looking for me. Lu Chen was a little happy, and at the same time, he sincerely hoped that Su Qingjun would come back as soon as possible. That way, these 2,000 spirit stones would be very easy to earn. Unexpectedly, just as he was secretly happy, he suddenly saw a figure appear on the mountain path below the Flying Goose Terrace, walking quickly in his direction. Damn it! Lu Chen's face immediately became long, and he looked angrily at the figure on the mountain path. He thought to himself, why is this person so disappointing? Can't he let me be happy for a while? Please wait. When the young man on the mountain path was about to reach the Flying Goose Terrace, suddenly a figure jumped out in front of him, blocking the mountain path, and shouted loudly. The young man was startled and could not help but take a step back, then looked at Lu Chen standing in the middle of the road in front of him, and asked in surprise, "Who are you?" Lu Chen's eyes fell on this person's face, and his eyes slightly narrowed. He recognized that this young man was also a member of the Su family. It was Su Wen, one of the brothers of the Su family that had the dispute over the stone garlic that had occurred in the grass garden that day, and besides Sumo and Su Qian, he was one of the 3 brothers of the Su family. Lu Chen slightly raised his eyebrows, and for a moment he remembered that yesterday, Sumo and Su Qian came here together to see Su Qingjun, but among the so-called 3 brothers of the Su family, only Su Wen was missing. When he saw Su Wen yesterday, he did not think so, but today, seeing Su Wen come to the Flying Goose Terrace alone, there seemed to be some unknown little secret. These thoughts flashed past Lu Chen's face, but his expression was calm, and he said to Su Wen calmly, "I am Lu Chen, greeting young Master Su." Su Wen was shocked again and said, "You know me?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "I used to work in the Flowing Fragrance Garden, and I have seen young Master Su. With a talent like you, it is very normal for me to know you." Su Wen made an "oh" sound and looked a little proud, then he waved his hand and said, "We are now on the mountain of Kunlun, and in the sect, there is no need to talk about common names. Let us call each other senior and junior brothers." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Very well, greeting senior brother Su." Su Wen nodded. He was just about to walk forward when he was suddenly stunned, and he seemed to have finally recovered from his shock. He looked at Lu Chen with astonishment and said, "Wait, this Soaring Goose Terrace is where my big sister Jun's abode is located, and it's always been her quiet and alone. Why are you here?" Lu Chen pointed in the direction of the spiritual field and said, "I am here to plant trees." Then he told him about how Su Qingjun wanted to eat the eagle fruit, and how Bai Chao Tang did its best to help, and so on. Su Wen listened and nodded, and then saw that there were indeed many black mud stains on Lu Chen's body, as if he had just walked out of the spiritual field, and so he believed him a little more, and said with a smile, "I see, then you must do your job well, and do not slack off, and delay my sister Jun's cultivation plan, or you will suffer. Of course, if you do well, this young master will naturally give you some rewards." Lu Chen looked at him with a smile, and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you, senior brother Su." Su Wen nodded, and then prepared to walk around Lu Chen, and walk towards the abode on the other side of the mountain wall. Unexpectedly, Lu Chen turned around, and blocked his way again. Su Wen's face darkened and he shouted, "Lu Chen, what are you doing? Why won't you let me go?" Lu Chen's expression was still gentle, and even though he was scolded by Su Wen, he did not get angry and only said, "Senior brother Su, it is not convenient for you to go now." Nonsense. Su Wen looked angry and pointed at Lu Chen and said, "I want to see Sister Jun, how dare you stop me? Let me tell you, Sister Jun loves me the most. If you dare to be impudent again, believe it or not, I will go back and tell Sister Jun, and ask her to immediately chase you down the mountain." "Oh." Lu Chen looked up at the sky helplessly, and thought for a while, and said to Su Wen, "Senior brother Su, to tell you the truth, the person who asked me to stop you here was actually Su Qingjun, Shaji Su." Su Wen was shocked and said, "What? Impossible." His face suddenly became pale, as if this sentence had deeply provoked him. Then, his reaction suddenly became intense, and he directly shouted towards the abode in the distance, Sister Jun, you are really annoyed with me? I don't believe it." As he shouted, the young man actually sounded like he was about to cry, and this scene made Lu Chen, who was standing at the side, somewhat dumbfounded. Even with Lu Chen's calm and sharp temperament, he was stunned for a while before he reacted. He quickly grabbed the shouting Su Wen, and said with a bitter smile, "This is a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. Senior brother Su, young master Su, you have misunderstood." Su Wen looked at him and asked with a trembling voice, What Shiji Su means is that today, in order to eat the eagle fruit and prepare for the perfect Jin Dan realm, she will not see anyone, and no one is allowed to disturb her. That is why she asked me to stop everyone here. He emphasized the last 3 words. Everyone. Su Wen became spirited. Yes, everyone. Lu Chen looked at him with a smile that was not a smile, and said, Senior brother Su, the relationship between you and your brother is really good. Of course. Knowing that he was not detested, Su Wen immediately regained his spirit, and even said with a hint of arrogance, only those 2 idiots, Sumo and Su Qian, refuse to follow me. Wait until I get the benefits and they will be greedy to death. Lu Chen looked at Su Wen's complacent face and smiled slightly. Chapter 152. But I'm already here. Su Wen paced back and forth on the mountain path. After a moment of hesitation, he shook his head and said, I can't come all the way here for nothing. Lu Chen frowned, but before he could speak, he heard Su Wen say, How about this? Move aside. I'll go and see Sister June. Once she hears that I'm here, she'll definitely see me. With that, Su Wen once again strode towards the abode on the soaring goose platform, completely ignoring Lu Chen's obstruction. Lu Chen stood to the side and was somewhat speechless. He thought to himself, do these young masters from aristocratic families really can't be bothered to look at me? Su Wen could be willful, but Lu Chen had to consider other things. If he were to knock and shout at the door, the fact that Su Qingjun wasn't here might be exposed. Thus, after a moment of hesitation, Lu Chen hurriedly took a few steps forward. Just as Su Wen was about to reach out and knock on the door, Lu Chen once again stopped him. Su Wen's face immediately revealed an unhappy expression. He looked coldly at Lu Chen and said, Don't you have any self-awareness? Be careful, you're asking for a beating. Lu Chen glanced at Su Wen indifferently and then calmly said, Young Master Su, before you disturb Shiji Su's meditation, I have 2 things to say. If you still want to find her after you hear them, I won't stop you. What do you think? Su Wen didn't notice that Lu Chen had suddenly changed the way he addressed him from Senior Su to Young Master Su. He only revealed an impatient expression, but in the end, he still waved his hand and snorted. He said, Say it quickly. Servants like you are the most troublesome. Lu Chen's eyes paused for a moment on Su Wen's finger that was waving in front of his eyes. A dark flame flashed in the depths of his eyes. He then smiled, his expression still gentle. He said, Young Master Su, your reputation is naturally great. When Shiji Su heard that you're here, she should come out to see you. Su Wen's face revealed a pleased expression. Lu Chen couldn't be bothered to look at him, and he continued speaking. However, no matter what, Senior Sister Su is cultivating right now. What if you disturb her at a critical juncture and cause her cultivation to be damaged? Wouldn't this cause a grudge to arise in her heart? Su Wen's expression changed and he said in a deep voice, Are you trying to scare me? How could there be such a coincidence? It's so early in the morning, maybe my elder sister June is still sleeping. Lu Chen helplessly looked up at the sky and saw that the sun was almost at its zenith. He laughed dryly and said, It's not likely that she's sleeping at this time. This is the first sentence. The second sentence is, even if Shiji Su loves you very much and doesn't bear a grudge, young Master Su, think about it. Shiji Su is currently carrying the expectations of her family's elders. Even the flaws in her Jin Dan realm need to be eliminated with the eagle fruit. She's such a hardworking person. If you disturb her with the deep love between you and her, how could she bear to do so? At the end of his speech, Lu Chen's words were sincere and full of emotion. His eyes shone brightly, as if he was trying his best to persuade Su Wen. Su Wen seemed to be a little shaken after listening to Lu Chen's words. He stopped in his tracks and frowned. He hesitated for a while, as if he was really moved by Lu Chen's words. That doesn't sound wrong. Su Wen said to himself, I don't have anything urgent to do. How about I come back after a few days? Lu Chen smiled and nodded. Su Wen thought for a while and finally made up his mind. He turned around and walked away. But this time, He didn't even greet Lu Chen. It seemed that he was still a little dissatisfied with this ignorant odd-job disciple who blocked his way. Lu Chen followed him to the side of the mountain path and watched Su Wen leave. He then grinned and said, "I almost believed what you said." Lu Chen also felt that it was a little funny. He shook his head and turned around, walking towards the thatched hut. When he was not far from the thatched hut, Lu Chen suddenly stopped. He frowned and looked at the spiritual field next to the thatched hut. He saw that on the originally empty ridge of the field, there was now a figure with his back facing Lu Chen. He wore a gray robe with big sleeves and a jade belt around his waist. His hair was gray and white. It seemed that he was not young. At this moment, the old man was holding a large wine urn in his hands. While looking at the eagle fruit trees in the spiritual field, he would occasionally take a sip of wine from the urn. Even from a distance, one could smell the rich aroma of wine. Lu Chen looked at the back of the old man who suddenly appeared. His pupils shrank a little, from the moment Su Wen appeared until now, although his attention was diverted by Su Wen, but this old man silently appeared beside the thatched hut and he actually did not notice it at all. It was obvious that this old man's cultivation was extremely high. He was definitely not an ordinary person. At this moment, the old man in front drank a mouthful of wine and suddenly said, "These 7 eagle fruit trees were planted by you?" Lu Chen looked around and confirmed that there was only him and the old man left on the flying goose platform. He then slowly walked forward and said, "Yes." The old man patted the wine jar and said with some praise, "Well planted." Lu Chen walked to the side of the old man and saw his face. He saw that the old man's face was wrinkled and his eyes were slightly cloudy. Perhaps it was because he had drunk too much. Other than that, he had a very conspicuous red nose. "Senior, may I ask who you are?" Lu Chen asked carefully. The old man looked back at him and suddenly grinned, revealing a few white teeth. He said, "I'm just passing by and came here to take a look." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment but still opened his mouth and said, "Senior, please forgive me for being blunt. This is the cave of our sect's Jin Dan Friar Su Qingjun. Normally, only she can cultivate here. With your identity, perhaps you shouldn't come here so casually." The old man's face sank slightly, and he actually seemed to possess a dignified aura. It was truly like the difference between the heavens and the earth when compared to Su Wen from before. It was to the point that Lu Chen felt his heart thump abruptly as vigilance involuntarily arose in his heart. "You dare to speak to me like this? Do you really know who I am?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "Disciple has been rude. But recently Shiji Su is at a critical juncture in her cultivation and may need to cultivate quietly. I am doing this because Shiji Su instructed me to do so." As he spoke, he raised his head slightly and said calmly, "We are all from the same sect and have camaraderie. With your cultivation realm, I can only take it as helping the younger generation. When Shiji Su comes out in the future, it will be another good karma. I believe she will remember your kindness. Everyone will be happy, so why not?" Lu Chen smiled and said with a humble expression, "This is just disciple's humble opinion. Please give me your guidance." The old man replied with an "Oh," and took another look at Lu Chen. After that, he smiled and even his gaze became much gentler. He said, "Little brat, you have a sharp tongue. You really know how to talk. Senior is flattering me. I am only doing my duty." Lu Chen said, "But what if I don't want to leave today? What will you do?" The old man suddenly laughed again, as if he was testing Lu Chen. He laughed and hugged the wine jar, looking at Lu Chen with interest. Lu Chen was startled and then smiled helplessly. He said, "Then I can't do anything." "Hey little guy, aren't you very smart? Why don't you think of a way to drive this old man away, or trick me?" The old man smiled and seemed to be in a good mood today. Lu Chen said honestly, "You are older than me and your cultivation is thousands of times stronger than mine. How can I use force?" In the face of such a huge difference in strength, what was the use of these little tricks? "It will only make a joke if I say it. It is better to be honest." The old man laughed heartily, seeming to be very carefree. He took a big gulp of wine, and a blush flashed across his face before disappearing in an instant. He smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Let me tell you, actually, Before he finished speaking, he suddenly frowned and stopped. At the same time, Lu Chen also sensed something and turned his head to look. After a moment, both of their gazes saw that on the mountain path, another figure appeared. The figure was hurriedly and quickly walking towards the flying goose platform. The old man's face darkened. He suddenly cursed and said, "Damn it! What is wrong with the Su family? There are so many damn people. There is no end to it all day." Lu Chen was startled. He did not seem to think that with the old man's status, he would actually curse so unscrupulously. He could not help but look at him. The old man seemed to feel Lu Chen's gaze. He rolled his eyes and said to Lu Chen, "Little guy, listen to me. If you can get rid of this person, I believe it will be of great help to the owner of this place." Lu Chen looked at him strangely and said, "If you really don't like this person, just scold him and it will be enough. Naturally that person will be scared witless and run away. Why go through so much trouble? Moreover, I may not be able to get rid of him." The gray-haired old man glared at him and said unhappily, "If I could show up, I would have already beaten these useless people to the point that even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them. It's either that June girl is soft-hearted or that she can't bear to part with these useless things. Forget it, let's not talk so much. Actually, even if I didn't come, you would still stop them, right?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "I still have to stop them. But whether I can stop them or not is another matter." "Stop them, stop them." The old man laughed and said, "These useless people are useless. They only know how to lie on June girl's body all day as if they are sucking her blood. I feel disgusted just looking at them. Get rid of them and give June girl some peace and quiet. I will naturally thank you." "And thank me?" Lu Chen's eyes lit up and he immediately said seriously, "What are you talking about, senior? I am not that kind of person." After saying that, he turned around and strode towards the mountain path. Chapter 153. The person who came was a youth, about 16 or 17 years old. He looked to be about the same age as Exin, but his temperament was completely different from the cheerful and lively Exin. This youth's face was fair without any facial hair. His appearance could be considered handsome, but for some reason, there was a rather feminine aura between his brows. Even the way he walked had a slightly swaying appearance of a girl. When Lu Chen saw this, he was momentarily stunned, and the words that he originally wanted to say were stuck in his throat. The youth also saw Lu Chen suddenly standing in front of the mountain path, blocking the way. He frowned his slender eyebrows, stopped walking and said to Lu Chen, "Who are you?" It would have been better if he hadn't spoken, but the moment he spoke, Lu Chen immediately felt goosebumps all over his body. As it turned out, this youth's voice was actually very feminine. It didn't have the rough tone of an ordinary man, and sounded almost like a girl. "I am Lu Chen. Young master, are you also here to find Su Qingjun Shiji Su?" Lu Chen quickly controlled his emotions, coughed, and then opened his mouth to ask. "Yes." The youth suddenly frowned, stared at Lu Chen and said, "What did you mean by the word, also, just now? Could it be that someone else came before me?" "Yes, there was already a young master of the Su family, called Su Wen, who came before us," Lu Chen said. "Su Wen?" The youth snorted as if there was some disdain on his face. He then walked forward and at the same time said, "I am also a member of the Su family, called Su Tong, Sister June's 8th brother. Step aside, I have something to see her about." Su Tong took 2 steps forward and suddenly stopped, because he found that Lu Chen was still blocking the mountain path and had no intention of letting him pass. Su Tong's face darkened, and a trace of anger appeared on his face. However, his face was really feminine and handsome like a girl's, and this anger made him look like a girl's coquettish pout, causing Lu Chen's scalp to go numb. "What are you doing? Why are you stopping me?" Lu Chen forced a smile and forced himself to explain Su Qingjuan's situation to him. In the end, he even persuaded him patiently, "Young Master Su, you and Shiji Su are brother and sister. I believe you can understand her current situation. She needs to take the eagle fruit for a few days. Why don't you go back first? As long as this period is over, she—" "No!" Su Tong suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted Lu Chen's words straightforwardly and even somewhat rudely. Lu Chen was stunned. Why is that? Su Tong looked as if he was clenching his teeth, but he didn't say what the reason was. He only said loudly again, I have an urgent matter, I want to see Sister June now. She is currently cultivating in the cave, so it is indeed inconvenient for her to come out. Lu Chen said earnestly, why don't you tell me what you need? Once she's free, I'll tell her immediately. I won't hold you up. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Su Tong suddenly shouted loudly. At the same time, his eyes suddenly became misty, looking as if he was about to cry. Lu Chen was dumbstruck and momentarily forgot what he should say. He thought to himself that the Su family was indeed a strange family. Could it be that the luck and benefits of the entire family had all been taken by Su Qingjun, and the rest were all people that couldn't be looked at directly? No wonder that old man looked as if he hated the Su family to the bone. It seemed that he had been viciously disgusted in the past. But even with such a family, Su Qingjun still patiently took care of them. Lu Chen suddenly felt that his impression of Su Qingjun had undergone an earth-shattering change. This wasn't a cold and arrogant temperament at all. This was clearly the heart of a bodhisattva. Because he felt that his 3 views and knowledge had been greatly stimulated, Lu Chen was in a daze. Carelessly, Su Tong ran past him and dashed towards the entrance of the cave. Lu Chen was shocked and quickly chased after him. Just as he wanted to catch him, he found that Su Tong was running gracefully, swaying like a lotus. For a moment, he couldn't catch him no matter how hard he tried. He could only smile bitterly and go around in a circle, stopping him at the entrance of the cave. He persuaded, Miss Su, don't be like this. What? Su Tong suddenly raised his eyebrows and stared at Lu Chen, shouting, What did you call me? Lu Chen was shocked and immediately came to his senses. He immediately said, Young Master Su. Young Master Su, I misspoke. Please don't be angry. Su Tong stared at him hatefully, his face full of anger. Lu Chen felt that this was a thorny problem. He thought that this Su Tong was more troublesome than all the people from the Su family added together. At that moment he had no choice but to let out a long sigh. His expression bleak, he said, forget it. In any case, I have tried my best. Even if Shiji Su is punished because of this, I don't think she can blame me. As he said that, he shook his head and took 2 steps to the side, giving way to the cave's stone door. Su Tong snorted and stretched out his hand to slap the stone door. But just as his palm was about to land on the door, he suddenly retracted his hand. He frowned and looked at Lu Chen. His face revealed a suspicious expression. He said, Tell me clearly. Why would Sister June be punished? Lu Chen nodded and said, Shiji Su is a heavenly genius. At such a young age, she has already surpassed all others in cultivation. The speed at which she advanced to the Jin Dan realm is unprecedented. You should be clear about this, right? Su Tong's face revealed a proud expression. He said, Of course. Our Sister June was born this outstanding. Lu Chen's eyes flashed. From the corner of his eyes, he suddenly saw a gray-haired old man at the edge of the spiritual field that was covered by trees and rocks. He was looking at them with a smile on his face. He chuckled and kept drinking. His expression didn't change. He said, However, although Shiji Su's talent is outstanding, she is also unusually diligent in her daily cultivation. It can even be considered as harsh. Let's not talk about other things. After advancing to the Jin Dan realm, she has to think of ways to eliminate the slight signs of instability in her aura. Who can understand the hardships in between? Su Tong's expression darkened. He seemed to have thought of something and snorted coldly. Lu Chen sighed and said, Actually, speaking of this, I think you should have an idea in your heart. The reason why Shiji Su is so diligent in her cultivation is actually because of the strict teachings of her master, Masato Kihara. She is meticulous and strives for perfection. That's why she has today's achievements. If you disturb her now, you will be violating Masato Kihara's order for her to meditate and cultivate. You can't guarantee that she will be reprimanded and punished later. How can you bear to do that? Su Tong's expression changed. He suddenly broke out into curses. He said angrily, "That old man Mu Yuan. He's old and frivolous. He's so daring in his lust that he keeps surrounding my sister June all day long." In the distance, the gray-haired old man's body trembled. He spat out a mouthful of wine that was in his mouth. Outside the immortal's cave, Lu Chen was also stunned. He waved his hands twice as if he wanted to stop Su Tong from continuing to speak. Unexpectedly, Su Tong, who was in a fit of anger, ignored him and continued to curse loudly. "Everyone in Kunwu City knows that my sister June has been gifted since she was a child. She was born with an immortal omen and was destined to become a person with great achievements in the future. At that time, many perfected sovereigns and spiritual masters in the Kunlun party took a fancy to our sister June. It was this shameless old man who was shameless and acted crafty. He secretly pretended to be a pitiful and lonely old man and begged Sister June while weeping bitterly. He made her soft-hearted for a moment and mistakenly entered this old man's tutelage." Lu Chen sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked at Su Tong, who looked like a woman but had a much more explosive temper than most men. For a moment, he had a whole new level of respect for him. He really felt that the saying, "You can't judge a book by its cover," was simply a famous saying. At the same time, he secretly glanced at the thatched hut. He saw that on the ridge of the field, the gray-haired old man was holding a wine urn. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. The light around him was faintly distorted, and there was actually the power of thunder and lightning. Lu Chen calmly took 2 steps back, distancing himself from Su Tong, who was spitting saliva everywhere. Then, he looked at him with a gaze full of respect, as if he was looking at a dead man. He coughed and laughed dryly. "This can't really be so exaggerated, right? I say, why don't you go back first and we'll talk about it another day?" Su Tong stared at the stone door of the immortal's cave in front of him. A trace of grief and indignation suddenly flashed across his face. After a moment, 2 lines of tears flowed from his eyes. Lu Chen was speechless as he watched from the side. When he was about to ask, he suddenly saw Su Tong throw himself in front of the door. He slapped the stone door and cried, Sister June, it's all because the men of the Su family are incompetent. If any of the men of the Su family had a promising future, how could they let you suffer such pain and suffering? If you weren't in Taiji but in Kuanji, how could your achievements be limited to a mere Jindan? How could your status in the sect be limited to this? Sister June, we've let you down. We've harmed you. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and looked at Su Tong, crying for a while. It seemed that Su Tong was completely immersed in his own world and could no longer pay attention to the outside world. On the other side, the gray-haired old man also looked stunned. He then shook his head vigorously as if he had seen a ghost. Lu Chen waited for a while, then walked up to Su Tong and pulled him up. He patiently persuaded him, and finally managed to persuade him. Of course, this was mainly due to what he said. Su Qingjun had already sacrificed so much. It was better not to implicate and hurt her anymore. Just let her have a little peace in the immortal's cave for a while. It could also be considered as a little heart-wrenching rest for this painful life. Hearing this, Su Tong burst into tears again. Only then did he walk away, looking back 3 times. Lu Chen sent this extremely eccentric young man away. After a while, he slowly walked back. Looking at the empty Fian platform, he could not help but let out a long sigh. He felt that dealing with him was more tiring than assassinating people who were 10 times more powerful than him in the past. Lu Chen shook his head and slowly walked to the side of the straw hut. The gray-haired old man was standing on the ridge of the field, looking at him coldly with a gaze as sharp as a knife. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, Senior, we are all reasonable people. Can you listen to what I have to say? The gray-haired old man shouted, and with a puss sound, the large wine urn under his ribs directly shattered into countless pieces, falling onto the soil of the field embankment with a hua-la-la sound. The Fian platform was instantly silent. Chapter 154. Lu Chen glanced at the overbearing gray-haired old man, and then glanced at the wine jar that had shattered into countless small pieces on the ground. After that, he sighed and said, "Senior, you're being unreasonable." The gray-haired old man said angrily, "If you have something to say it quickly." Lu Chen immediately sped up and said, "First, you told me before that as long as I can get rid of that Su Tong, you will give me a reward and not a punishment. I can't just go back on my word. Second, those curses just now were all cursed by that stupid Su family boy. I didn't say anything. You can't vent your anger on me, right?" He looked at the gray-haired old man and said with a smile, "Senior, do you think what I said is right?" The gray-haired old man looked at him for a long time. The anger on his face suddenly eased, and there was a bit of admiration on his face. He said with a smile, "You kid, you are a bit interesting. From what you said, it seems like you have already guessed my identity." Lu Chen said, "Yes, I guessed a little before, but I didn't dare to confirm it, but it should be more or less right now." As he said this, he bowed and said seriously, "I pay my respects to Masato Kihara." Masato Kihara was Su Qingjuan's Shizhuan. He was also a Yuanying Jinren with extremely high cultivation in the Kunlun party. At the same time, he had another more sensitive identity that was the leader of the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party. His position in the Kunlun party was extremely high. The gray-haired old man clapped his hands and said, "Interesting. Tell me, how did you know my identity?" Lu Chen said with a respectful expression, "Senior is fond of fine wine. This disciple has heard rumors before." The gray-haired old man nodded, but then said, "But just based on this, I'm afraid it's not justifiable." Lu Chen said, "There is another matter, here and now. Su Qingjun, Shiji Su, is now one of the most outstanding geniuses in the sect. Everyone in the sect knows how much you value her. This is an important moment of cultivation. Logically speaking, the other spiritual masters should avoid arousing suspicion and shouldn't appear here. Only you, Senior, can avoid suspicion. Comparing the two, I think Senpai is most likely Masato Kihara." The gray-haired old man stared at Lu Chen for a moment, before he finally nodded his head and said, "Well said. Such quick thinking. It's a pity that you don't have a good aptitude and can only be a service disciple." "What a pity." Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's all natural. There's nothing we can do about it." The eccentric Yuanying Jinren, who was said to have shouldered all the dangers by himself, did not seem to have any unreasonable actions. He turned around and flicked his sleeve, and the broken pieces of the wine urns on the ground flew up and gathered into a pile. He sat down again on the ridge of the field, and beckoned to Lu Chen, saying, "Come and sit." Lu Chen walked over and sat down beside him. Masato Kihara looked at him. The admiration in her eyes increased, but there was even more regret. Of course, this kind of gaze and emotion only flashed past. He smiled and said, "When I was angry just now, why didn't you show any fear? How did you see that I'm not angry?" Lu Chen paused, then pointed to the pile of broken pieces and said, "That wine urn is broken, but the wine inside did not spill out. You crushed it after drinking all the wine, right?" Masato Kihara laughed and nodded repeatedly. "June girl really has good taste. She actually chose such a quick-witted person like you to come over." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Senior, you flatter me. You should stay here for a long time. If there's anything, help to fend off those Su family people so that June girl can also relax. Otherwise, it will be too hard for her to be troubled by these trivial matters all day long." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, then said, "Thank you, Senior, for your kind intentions, but this matter will most likely need to be decided by Shiji Su herself. After all, Flying Goose Terrace is her place of quiet cultivation. If she herself does not like outsiders here, then no one can do anything about it." Masato Kihara nodded slowly. Although he was the Shizhuan, it seemed that he really doted on his talented disciple, Su Qingjun. He would not casually come over and tell her what to do. Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, with your power as a Jinren, it won't take much effort to drive away those strange disciples of the Su family. Why do you need to go through so much trouble?" Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and snorted coldly, "Nonsense. How can I not know about this matter? But isn't this because I have misgivings? June girl has a kind heart. She has always felt that she is born of the Su family and has received the full support of the Su family. So, she has always wanted to take care of that big family. So all these years, those good-for-nothing fellows have all pestered her for countless trivial matters, big and small. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, although this is reasonable, but in this disciple's opinion, it is necessary to be more respectful and filial to the elders who are valued by the family. As for the many troublesome youngsters below, it is not a problem to help out when there is an emergency. But if there is an excessive request, it is also possible to decline. Masato Kihara slapped his thigh and said loudly, isn't this the reason? Unfortunately, I have spoken to June Girl a few times. She has verbally agreed, but when she cries and begs those good-for-nothings in the family, her heart has repeatedly softened. I also can't do anything about her. Lu Chen smiled and didn't answer. The latter part of the conversation was indeed not easy to answer. Masato Kihara could say this, but he couldn't. Moreover, looking at Masato Kihara's appearance, his heart ached for Su Qingjun. Perhaps it was sincere, but he didn't care about those Su family's children because of Su Qingjun. Taiji was in such an awkward and declining situation, and the Su family was second to none in Kunwa City. Because of Su Qingjun, he would naturally stand on Taiji's side. He could also be regarded as Taiji's financial backer. Although Masato Kihara's cultivation was 100 times higher than those good-for-nothings in the Su family, this face wasn't that easy to overturn. People often said that cultivators were like immortals, as if those who succeeded in cultivation were living the life of immortals. In fact, how could it be so easy and beautiful? There were always many helplessness and many fetters that couldn't be removed. No matter how big the world was, there was no exception. For a while, Masato Kihara and Lu Chen didn't speak. The spiritual field was quiet. The mountain breeze blew gently. Looking from behind, the two of them, one old and one young, sat side by side on the ridge of the field. They looked very harmonious, and it was impossible to see that there was actually a world of difference in status between the two. After sitting for a while, Masato Kihara suddenly shook her head and sighed softly. She stood up and patted her buttocks, saying, forget it. I don't care about these dog skin and stove matters anymore. Go and call Qingjun out. I'll see her and give her a few words of advice before I leave. Lu Chen was startled and looked at Masato Kihara in astonishment. After waiting for a moment, Masato Kihara suddenly found that Lu Chen was still standing in place. She couldn't help but frown, saying, why aren't you going? For a moment, Lu Chen only felt a headache. If those people from the Su family ran over to pester Su Qingjun, he could still block them. But this person in front of him was Su Qingjun's master and the famous Yuanying spiritual master. How could he block her? After a moment of daze, Lu Chen smiled bitterly, saying, this? Senior Sister Qing, she's meditating, nonsense. As expected, Masato Kihara scolded back without thinking. Looking at him with a contemptuous expression, she said, I'm her master. How can I not know her situation? These words can only deceive the Su family's inexperienced trash. It's just eating some eagle fruit, why meditate? Just eat and sleep every day. When the time comes, just take the fruit and swallow it. There's no need for so many things. Go and call her out. Lu Chen smiled awkwardly, groaning inwardly. In this instant, thousands of ideas flashed through his mind, but none of them could solve the current predicament and send the old man away. He had no choice but to turn around and slowly walk toward the cave residence's stone door. He shook his head inwardly and smiled wryly as he thought, Su Qingjun, you're just unlucky. Who knew that even your master would come looking for trouble with you today? This is really unstoppable. Behind him, Masato Kihara was a little anxious. Frowning, she said, hey kid, weren't you so smart and capable just now? Why are you walking so slowly? Is something wrong? Lu Chen was startled. These Yuanying geezers were all as cunning as ghosts, able to sense the slightest thing wrong. He didn't dare to delay any longer, but he still couldn't think of a solution as he walked to the cave residence's door. Standing in front of the stone door, he subconsciously reached into his bosom. The yellow stone talisman was still lying there quietly. However, Lu Chen quickly put his hand down and coughed. Imitating the Su family disciples, he began banging on the stone door with force, calling out in a clear voice, Shiji Su, open the door, your master is here. Unsurprisingly, the stone door stood tall and unresponsive. Lu Chen looked back and saw that Masato Kihara was also walking over with a frown. He coughed once and smiled at Masato Kihara. Then, pa, he continuously banged on the stone door. The movement was not small and the sound was very loud, but the stone door did not open. After a while, Lu Chen somewhat helplessly turned his head to look at Masato Kihara and said, Senior, you see, perhaps Shiji Su is really meditating at the moment. Why don't we not disturb her? Meditating my ass. Spiritual Master Muyuan seemed to speak very naturally in front of an insignificant servant disciple like Lu Chen. He casually scolded him, but then a suspicious look appeared on his face. He looked at the stone door and muttered to himself in a low voice, but could it be that this girl's old habit is acting up and she's sleeping in again? Sleep in what? Lu Chen didn't hear clearly and asked, What did you say, who likes to sleep? Nothing like that. Masato Kihara flatly said. Then his eyes turned and he waved his hand saying, Get out of the way, I'll go in and take a look myself. Senior, this isn't too good, right? Chapter 155. Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and said, What's not very good? This old man is her Shifu. I'm concerned about her going in to take a look. What's there to be surprised about? Lu Chen sternly said, Senior, although your seniority is high and your cultivation is high, but no matter what, the one living here is an unmarried young lady. If you suddenly barge in like this, in case? He did not continue, only looked at Masato Kihara with a meaningful look. Masato Kihara angrily said, In case what? You tell this old man clearly. Lu Chen said, In case after you go in, you see something you shouldn't see, to say something disrespectful, Shiji Su lives alone in the cave, usually she wears, it's normal for her to wear something simple, but if you see it like this, I'm afraid it's not good for both you and her. Masato Kihara was furious, said, Stinky brat, you dare to talk to me like this? Lu Chen coughed and said, Senior, both of us are reasonable people, although your cultivation is 100 times higher than mine, but the reason is indeed so. After saying that, he suddenly lowered his voice, leaned close to Masato Kihara and said in a low voice, Don't forget, just now that Su family's boy Su Tong said those shameful words, every word hit the heart. People like us who understand naturally snorted and did not believe it, but in case you go in, some words won't be clear. Masato Kihara was startled, subconsciously took a step back and said, That's right. Lu Chen spread out his hands and said, Isn't that so? The more Masato Kihara thought, the more he felt it was reasonable, nodded repeatedly and said, That's right, you're right, this old man almost made a big mistake. After saying that, he looked at Lu Chen, his eyes revealed a bit of joy and said, Little guy is not bad, you would rather contradict this old man and still want to explain the reason, you really have strength of character. Lu Chen spat in his heart, thought, Who wants this bullshit strength of character? If I can leave, this old man would have left long ago. But on the surface, he still laughed dryly and took a step back, thinking that since it has come to this old man should leave first no matter what. Who knew that although Masato Kihara seemed to have dispelled the idea of breaking into the cave, he had no intention of leaving Fian platform. Instead, after a moment of contemplation, he suddenly frowned, as if he had thought of something. Lu Chen looked at his expression, his heart thumped again. Facing such a nascent soul realm old man was not the same as dealing with the trash disciples of the Su family. It was really hard as hell. As expected, Master Muth thought for a moment, then looked at Lu Chen and said, That's not right. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, What is not right? Masato Kihara said, You have been knocking on the stone door of this cave for half a day. June girl did not open the door and come out. It's fine if it's like this on a normal day, but if the eagle fruit suddenly ripens and you want to call her, but she can't hear you, what should we do? Lu Chen was speechless. Masato Kihara looked at him, his eyes revealing some suspicion, and said, "With June Girl's intelligence, she would not have overlooked this. She must have given you something to contact her at any time, right?" Lu-chan looked at Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara also stared at him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Lu-chan suddenly slapped his forehead, shouted loudly and sighed, "AI, look at my memory. Shiji Su really gave me a burning heart talisman. A pity that my skills are low and I have never used it before. I actually forgot about it." Forgot? Masato Kihara looked at him with a smile that did not seem like a smile. Lu-chan sternly said, "I forgot." Saying so, he took out a yellow stone talisman from his bosom and handed it to Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara took the yellow stone talisman and looked at it, weighing it in his palm a few times. Then he was not in a hurry to use it. Instead, he raised his head and looked at Lu-chan again, suddenly smiled and said, "Brat, luckily you were born with a bad innate talent, only one pillar of the 5 elements divine plate. You can only be an odd job disciple. Otherwise, with your intelligence, wit, and cunning as a ghost, if you really had the apex talent of the 4 or 5 pillars, and were properly trained since young, I really don't know who in this world could be your opponent." Lu-chan smiled and said, "Senior, you must be joking." Masato Kihara snorted and did not say anything more. 2 of his fingers held the yellow stone talisman and gently fiddled with it. He didn't see how he cast a spell, but suddenly a flame rose from the stone talisman, swaying and burning. The flame was not big and the temperature was not high, but it looked very bright. It only flickered for a moment, then quickly dimmed. Masato Kihara looked at Lu-chan. Lu-chan said, "Looks like this burning heart talisman is not broken, really good." Masato Kihara clicked his tongue and said, "Now I feel that you should be hiding something from me." Lu-chan resolutely shook his head and said, "There is no such thing." Masato Kihara snorted and did not say anything. The two of them stood in front of the stone door and waited for a while, but the stone door still did not move. There was no sign of it opening. Masato Kihara's expression gradually became ugly, and he turned to look at Lu-chan. He saw that Lu-chan was staring at the stone door, as if there was the most wonderful and strange thing in the world on the stone door attracting his attention, completely ignoring the wind and grass around him. Masato Kihara's face was cold and he said, "What is going on? If you don't explain clearly to me, be careful I—" Before he finished speaking, they suddenly heard a rush of wind coming from above, mixed with a sharp whistling sound. It came from the dense ancient forest on the mountain wall in front of them. Lu-chan and spiritual master Muyuan looked up at the same time. A moment later, a slim figure flew out of the forest, drawing a graceful arc in the air. She spun lightly and landed like a lithe bird. She was devastatingly beautiful and her eyes were bright. It was none other than Su Qingjun. A fragrant wind blew, like clouds falling, a few crystal-clear morning dew, like the wings of a bird flying freely in the forest, still lingering on the scarlet feathers on her shoulder. When the sun shone down, it reflected a dreamy and magnificent rainbow. "What is it? Is the eagle fruit ripe?" Just as they landed, Su Qingjun opened her mouth to ask Lu-chan. "Quickly take me there, don't delay." After saying this, she seemed to notice Masato Kihara standing at the side, and only then did she slightly apologetically say to Masato Kihara, "Shifu, you also came. But wait a moment, the eagle fruit is ripe, I am in a hurry to eat it first, I will come to greet you later." Masato Kihara opened her mouth, but didn't say anything, while Lu-chan stood at the side, not moving a single step, as if he hadn't heard anything. Su Qingjun took 2 steps forward, then immediately turned her head back with some surprise, looking at Lu-chan, saying, "Lu-chan, what is it? Didn't you say that you would only use the heart-burning talisman to call me back when the eagle fruit is ripe? Why haven't you left yet?" Lu-chan remained silent, only looking at Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara was a bit embarrassed, coughing once, and said, "Qingjun, this eagle fruit is not ripe yet." Su Qingjun was startled for a moment, then a trace of anger flashed across her face, and she angrily said to Lu-chan, "Hey, Lu-chan, what is the matter with you? Such a big matter, are you treating it as a child's play? You have some guts, you dare to play with me? Let me tell you, believe it or not." Lu-chan clenched his teeth, a gloomy expression on his face, and only silently looked at Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara's old face turned red, and she hurriedly stepped forward to stop Su Qingjun, saying with a bitter smile, Hey, don't be anxious, Qingjun, don't scold little Lu, this matter is not his fault. Su Qingjun snorted, looking very dissatisfied, and glared at Lu Chen, saying angrily, How is it not his fault? I clearly only gave him the heart-burning talisman, reminding him that he must wait for the eagle fruit to ripen before using it, but the result, I am so angry. Masato Kihara gave a hollow laugh, saying, This heart-burning talisman? Well, actually, Master used it just now. Su Qingjun was startled, somewhat surprised, and turned to look at Masato Kihara, revealing a puzzled expression, saying, Master, why did you use this heart-burning talisman? Besides, the eagle fruit hasn't ripened yet. Masato Kihara seemed to dote on this beautiful and peerless female disciple of hers, and usually spoke without any dignity as a master. At this time, she could only say with a smile, I came to see you, but the cave residence's stone door didn't open even after I knocked for a long time, so I forced Lu Chen to find you, so I took the heart-burning talisman, Master. Su Qingjun stamped her feet, and although she didn't say anything, the expression in her eyes when looking at Masato Kihara seemed to have said too much. Masato Kihara rolled her eyes and suddenly asked, By the way, why aren't you in your cave residence so early in the morning? Where have you been? Su Qingjun snorted and said, I went to the top of the mountain to practice my swordsmanship. Didn't you teach me that the chi of the morning sun is the key to growth, and it can make up for the lack of the quiet moon? Masato Kihara nodded and said, That's right. Saying this, she suddenly smiled and said, Actually, I came here early in the morning to remind you that although you have to wait for the eagle fruit to ripen and can't leave, you still have to wake up early to practice your swordsmanship. Don't slack off. Standing at the side, Lu Chen immediately looked at this old man in a new light, and a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. He thought to himself, Old people are really thick-skinned to be able to say such words so naturally. Su Qingjun glanced at her master, and there was a hint of suspicion in her eyes. She seemed to know Masato Kihara very well, and was very suspicious of what he had just said. Masato Kihara coughed, and glared at Su Qingjun and said, Stupid girl, what are you looking at? Your master is here to give you some advice. Don't be so rude in front of outsiders. Su Qingjun snorted, and turned to stand aside. Lu Chen quickly said, You two take your time, I'm going to plant trees in the spiritual field. Saying this, he quickly walked away. Only now did Lu Chen let out a long sigh of relief and thought to himself, These 2,000 spiritual stones are really not easy to earn. However, when he walked to the edge of the spiritual field, he was suddenly startled as he thought of something. In the end, he muttered angrily, This damn old man, where's the reward he promised me? He's pretending to be dead and not giving it to me. Chapter 156. Lying on the bed in the hut, Lu Chen used his hands as a pillow. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he was resting his mind. What happened outside the hut seemed to have nothing to do with him. Noon had passed, and it was quiet outside. The Fian platform seemed to have returned to its original state. At this moment, there was a sudden knock on the door of the hut. Lu Chen walked over and opened the door. Seeing Su Qingjun standing outside, he smiled and said, Are you done? Su Qingjun smiled and said, Yes, my master has left. Lu Chen breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. Just as he was about to speak, he looked at his shabby hut and said, This hut is small and shabby. It's too crowded for two people to stand. I won't invite you in. Su Qingjun glanced at his hut and was slightly startled. She said, It's not very good. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, This hut was built on your Fian platform. Don't you know? Su Qingjun said, I really didn't know. This hut was built by your Baichao Tang people. You see, I can't possibly build a hut for you to live in, right? Besides, I really don't know how to do this. Lu Chen nodded. He thought that if it was really Su Qingjun, this hut might be spacious and comfortable. It was just that the Baichao Tang people looked down on the odd job disciples. The eagle fruit tree had to be taken care of, but of course, no one cared about his hut. It was good enough to have a place to lie down. However, the two of them felt a little awkward talking to each other through a door. Thus, Lu Chen simply walked out of the thatched hut. The two of them stood on the ridge of the spirit field. A few cool breezes blew past and white clouds floated in the distance. It made them feel refreshed all of a sudden. "When did you come back?" Lu Chen asked Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun said, "Just now." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and said, "Then when you activated the heart-burning talisman just now, I arrived just in time. I took a detour to the back of the mountain and came down." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Did I tell you before that you're actually very good at lying when you're serious?" Su Qingjuan's fair cheeks blushed slightly, and she said angrily, "Nonsense, there's no such thing." Lu Chen laughed and then told her about what happened in the morning. After listening, Su Qingjuan's face showed a trace of apology and said, "It's really been hard on you, but I really didn't misjudge you. You really are smarter than them." After a pause, Su Qingjun continued, "The spirit stones are in the immortal's cave. I don't have them on me right now. I'll go back and get them for you later." Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand, and with a carefree expression he said, "You're too kind. How can I not believe you? You can get them whenever you want, there's no hurry." Su Qingjun looked at him and said, "You're really not in a hurry?" Lu Chen said seriously, "No, it's very urgent." Standing at the edge of the field, the mountain breeze blew past. For some reason, probably because the burden on her mind was gone, Su Qingjun had a rare smile on her face and looked relaxed. She looked at the eagle fruit trees and asked, "How are the eagle fruits?" Lu Chen said, "You're really lucky. There were no accidents and no fruits ripened. But I estimate that from tomorrow onwards, there will be eagle fruits that will ripen. I'll keep an eye on this place." Su Qingjun smiled sweetly and said, "I know. I won't go anywhere other than Flying Goose Terrace." Lu Chen said, "Really?" Su Qingjun said, "Look at what you're saying. I've already said all that. Why do you still look like you don't believe me?" "Because you said the same thing yesterday, and then secretly ran away last night." Su Qingjun was speechless for a moment. After a while, she smiled and said, "Wasn't it because I had urgent matters to attend to? Anyway, now that the urgent matter is over, I really won't leave." "Huh, why are you looking at me like that?" Lu Chen stared at Su Qingjuan's beautiful face, and after a while, he nodded and said, "In the past, I always thought that you were always cold and arrogant. Who would have thought that after getting to know you a little, I would find that you're actually quite easygoing?" Su Qingjun was also slightly startled, and then she felt a little strange in her heart. Other than her own Su family members, this was actually the first time that she had spoken so much to a lowly odd job disciple. She was also a little hesitant, but then she heard Lu Chen say from the side, "In that case, I have a few words that I don't really want to say, but I don't know if you want to hear them?" Seeing that he was speaking seriously, Su Qingjuan's expression also became somewhat serious. After a moment of silence, she said solemnly, "Please advise me." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's not really advice. I'm just an odd job disciple, and I don't dare to have that kind of thought. It's just that in my opinion, you have too many relatives in your family. In the 20 days that you've eaten the eagle fruit, I think it's very difficult for you to guarantee that no one will come looking for you again, right?" Su Qingjun was silent. If at that time they cry incessantly, saying that they've encountered a huge problem and only you can help solve it, what will you do? Lu Chen looked at Su Qingjuan's beautiful face and said lightly, "At that time, will you go down the mountain or not? Are you sure there won't be any problems with this choice?" Su Qingjun was silent for a long time, then she smiled bitterly and said softly, "I don't know." Lu Chen looked at her for a while, then suddenly smiled and said, "You've been tired for the whole morning, go back to sleep." After saying this, Lu Chen turned around and walked back to the thatched hut. Seeing that somewhat shabby wooden door close in front of her, Su Qingjun slightly lowered her head. The excitement and joy from rushing back in time suddenly disappeared for some reason. She stared blankly at the thatched hut, then looked at the eagle fruit tree in the spirit field. After a while, she silently turned around and walked towards the cave in the distance. The Fian Terrace was very quiet in the afternoon. In the blink of an eye, it was dusk, and the afterglow of the setting sun shone down. Lu Chen suddenly saw a gap in the window next to him, and then a woman stood outside and said, "I have a very delicious spirit fruit here. Do you want to eat it?" "Yes." Lu Chen jumped up. Under the setting sun, the Fian Terrace was covered with a layer of red coat. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun sat side by side on the ridge of the field, a little distance apart. There was a plate in the middle of the ground, on which there were 8 or 9 bright red spirit fruits like peaches, and there were 4 or 5 fruit pits on the ground next to them. Lu Chen was holding a spirit fruit in his hand, and he was chewing it. Su Qingjun looked at him, and the expression on her face changed from a little surprise to a little amusement, and then she really laughed and said, "You really don't have to be polite?" Lu Chen said, "Nonsense, I usually can't eat these spirit fruits. Why would I let go of this opportunity? You're really interesting." "I'm a little different from others." "How is it different?" "As a servant disciple, you don't seem to have much respect for me, Jean Dan Friar, and you talk to me very naturally and easygoing, which is rare." "Well, I don't mean anything else. I think it's good this way." Lu Chen's hand paused for a moment, and his eyes flickered, and he said, "Is that true? Maybe I heard someone say that before." "Really? Who is it?" Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand, saying, "A bald old guy, far worse than you." "Oh." Su Qingjun nodded, and then she seemed to hesitate for a moment and didn't continue to speak. But Lu Chen looked at her, and then he gently threw away another fruit pit in his hand, and then said with a smile, "I've eaten this spirit fruit, you can ask me anything you want." Su Qingjun glared at him, and suddenly burst into laughter, and then she sighed, "It's so easy to talk to a smart person like you." As she said that, she sat up straight and said, "Well, I won't beat around the bush. What you said to me at the end of the day, I actually understand that it's a big problem, but well, anyway, you know it's a bit difficult and I don't know what to do. Judging from what you said before, maybe you have a good idea?" Lu Chen clapped his hands and said, "This matter actually depends on how you look at it." "How so?" "Those relatives of yours came to bother you with all kinds of things for so long. Is it really a matter of life and death?" Su Qingjun was silent. Lu Chen said again, "You said that people are different from each other, and the small things in our eyes may be a matter of life and death in the eyes of others. But I don't believe that you haven't thought that those things really can't be delayed, right? Delay it for a few days, and you don't have to deal with it immediately, okay?" Su Qingjuan's gaze swept into the distance, still not saying a word, but this silence seemed to have explained something. After a while, Su Qingjun nodded and said softly, "What you said actually makes a lot of sense, but sometimes I still can't put down your pride?" Lu Chen said lightly. Su Qingjun smiled bitterly. "To be honest, it's also the first time I've seen a proud daughter of an aristocratic family like you." Lu Chen said, "I always feel that the whole Su family has to be on my shoulders, and I have to solve everything by myself. When others come to beg you, you're shy and embarrassed to refuse them." Su Qingjun frowned with some distress, and after a while, she suddenly realized that the surroundings had quietened down. She raised her head in surprise, and looked at Lu Chen and said, "Why don't you continue?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "I've already said it so directly, so seriously, and you're still not angry?" Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "What you said is the truth. What's there for me to be angry about?" Lu Chen stared at her for a while, and the gaze in the depths of his eyes gradually became gentler, and then he nodded and said, "All right. I have a way to help you." Chapter 157. Su Qingjuan's eyes lit up and she said, "What method?" Lu Chen glanced at her and said, "You don't need to see those people." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and then she said angrily, "How is that possible, they?" Halfway through her words, she suddenly paused and looked thoughtfully at Lu Chen. She seemed to have thought of something and said, "You mean you're going to?" Lu Chen said straightforwardly, "I'm going to stop them. You hide in the cave and pretend you don't know about these things." This Su Qingjun was a little stunned for a moment. She looked a little tempted on the surface, but she seemed to be a little worried. Lu Chen looked on from the side and also felt a little emotional. He didn't expect that the genius girl of the Su family, who was so valued by the outside world, would have such a tangled temperament. One really couldn't judge a book by its cover. However, she valued her family so much. Wasn't this the kind of kinship that he had never had in his life? What kind of kinship was that? Lu Chen shook his head and said to Su Qingjun, "Think about it yourself. Anyway, I've told you what to do. The final decision is up to you." Su Qingjun's expression changed. After a moment, she suddenly gritted her teeth and said, "Okay, I'll do as you say." Seeing that she had made up her mind so quickly, Lu Chen was a little surprised and said, "You've thought it through?" Su Qingjun nodded and said with a resolute expression, "Yes, this time I've thought it through. What you said just now is all right. No one has said it to me so clearly in the past, or maybe I'm clear in my heart, but I can't bring myself to say it. In short, I feel that this time, I still have to focus on my own cultivation and put aside the family matters for the time being." Lu Chen grunted and said, "Since you've made up your mind, then it's easy. But there are still some words that I have to say to you first." Su Qingjun said, "Say it." "First, you cannot be soft-hearted. You know very well what your relatives are like. When the time comes, when they cry and beg, you will pretend that you can't see or hear them. You will just stay in the cave and not come out. All right." Su Qingjun nodded heavily. It seemed that she had made up her mind this time. Lu Chen continued, "Secondly, your Su family is an aristocratic family, and the children of your family are all proud and arrogant. If they are stopped by an unknown odd-job disciple like me, they might get angry and want to teach me a lesson. At that time, if I use my power to bully others and act recklessly, I will naturally deserve to be beaten. But if I'm on the side of reason, will you support me?" Su Qingjun was startled and said, "If they really bullied you for no reason, of course I have to protect you." Lu Chen smiled and suddenly slapped his cheeks, saying, "They hit my face, I can't and don't have the strength to fight back. Then after you come out, what will you do? Will you lightly scold them or will you hit them back?" Lu Chen stared at Su Qingjun. His mouth lightly said words of criticism. Su Qingjun became silent again, but this time she kept looking at Lu Chen. Her eyes suddenly became somewhat cold. "Why do I suddenly feel that you seem to be trying to sow discord between me and my family?" Su Qingjun said softly. "We have only known each other for a short time. As the saying goes, strangers do not get close. Do you think I can do that?" Lu Chen asked her in reply. Su Qingjun stood up and said, "Then how can you ask me to do this for you?" Lu Chen also slowly stood up and looked at the beautiful woman in front of him, saying, "Then why should I help you do this kind of strenuous and unrewarding thing? Am I crazy?" Su Qingjun was stunned speechless. Under the setting sun, the shadows of the two of them were stretched very long on the ground. Su Qingjun looked at the slender figure and was in a trance for a moment. It seemed that she wanted to say something, but she swallowed it back. "You see, the principles in this world are all the same. If you can't do this, I can't help you." Lu Chen said calmly, "I know that in the past, you probably always thought that others should be happy to help you, regardless of the reward, regardless of the gains or losses, and you also take care of your family in the same way. But I am different." Lu Chen said in a very calm but firm tone, "This kind of thing, I must make you make up your mind and clearly stand on my side, only then I dare to help you. I am just a small figure, the weakest and smallest odd-job disciple in Kunlun Mountain. Anyone can bully me, right? An ant also has an ant's way of living." Su Qingjun's expression changed slightly, as if she was a little shocked, but in the end, she did not speak. Lu Chen did not say anything more to her, but turned around and walked back to the straw hut, at the same time saying, "It's late, go back and rest. It's getting late. Go back and rest. I will call you tomorrow when the eagle fruit ripens." The moon rose and set, the stars changed, and the quiet night passed quietly. A new day had begun. After walking out of the straw hut, Lu Chen faced the morning sun and stretched, then casually walked around the flying goose platform, before returning to the spiritual field and began to busy himself. In the middle of it, he looked at the cave abode once, only to see that the stone door was tightly shut, and there was no movement all morning. In response, he only smiled and did not say anything more, just buried his head in what he was doing. About an hour before noon, Lu Chen, who was preparing to leave the spiritual field to rest, suddenly smelled a strange fragrance. His body trembled slightly and he immediately looked up, then turned around twice in the spiritual field, and soon saw that on a certain fruit tree, an eagle fruit had ripened. Lu Chen clicked his tongue twice, as if he was admiring it, but also as if he found it funny. Then he took out the yellow stone talisman from his bosom, and with a whoosh, the strange flame ignited. Then he turned his head to look at the stone door of the cave abode on the mountain wall. At first it was still quiet there. But soon, suddenly, a rumbling sound came from the stone door, breaking the silence. After a moment, a figure rushed out with a whoosh, like an arrow released from a bow, and swept to the side of the spiritual field. It was Su Qingjun. Was it you who ignited the heart-burning talisman? An eagle fruit has ripened? As soon as she stopped, she asked hurriedly. Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then immediately pointed in the direction of the ripened eagle fruit behind him. Su Qingjuan's body floated up and easily jumped into the air, plucking the fruit. It was only the size of a thumb, and she swallowed it in one gulp. Then, after letting out a sigh of relief, she directly sat cross-legged on the ridge of the field. It seemed that she was adjusting her breathing and digesting this rare fruit. And Lu Chen looked at her with interest. At this moment, Su Qingjun could not say that her clothes were disheveled, but it was also not her usual attire. Her originally meticulous hair was still messy, and a few strands of beautiful hair hung down. Her clothes were mostly loose, and although she was not naked, it looked like a girl's bedroom pajamas. There was no makeup on her face, and there was a faint trace of tiredness in her expression. As Lu Chen looked at her, a strange expression suddenly appeared on his face. After about the time to drink a cup of tea, probably digesting the eagle fruit, Su Qingjun let out a long breath, stood up, and said, "Sure enough, the fresh eagle fruit is different from the others. It is indeed very useful for me to stabilize my Jindan realm. Of course, no matter what, your master Masato Kihara is an experienced and knowledgeable Yuaning Jinren, she would not lie." Lu Chen replied. Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Thank you." Saying this, she intended to turn around and walk back to the cave residence. But at this time, she suddenly heard Lu Chen suddenly ask behind her, Shiji Su, if I may be so bold as to ask, looking at your eye attire, could it be that you were still sleeping?" But at this time, she suddenly heard Lu Chen suddenly ask, "Nonsense, there is no such thing." Su Qingjuan's body stiffened, and a trace of embarrassment flashed across her face. She said, "Nonsense, there's no such thing." After that, she lowered her head and walked away quickly. Lu Chen looked at her back thoughtfully. Cultivators were also humans. Naturally, they would also sleep and rest. There was nothing strange about this in itself. But the problem was that Su Qingjun was famous for being obsessed with cultivation and diligent. According to the rumors in the Kunlun party, she was a model disciple who would wake up early in the morning and train hard at night. The general meaning of the rumors was to warn everyone that this genius was extremely diligent and had a bit of talent to achieve such achievements. Then, Lu Chen saw that the sun was already high up in the sky, and this beautiful woman was actually sleeping in his cave residence alone. This matter was too shocking, too unexpected. Something wasn't right. Lu Chen couldn't quite believe his own eyes. But very quickly, he thought of the details of those things that happened earlier. Early in the morning, there was no response for a long time. Maybe she wasn't cultivating and didn't hear me. Maybe she was sleeping and didn't hear me. After such a long time, she must have spent quite a lot of time to dress up and dress herself up to her usual meticulous appearance. Everyone, even the Su family members whom she valued the most, are not allowed to enter her cave residence. They can only talk outside? In her cave residence, only she can enter alone. What's so strange about it? Could it be that she had just woken up and her bed is messy and afraid of being seen by others? Lu Chen was also in a daze. Suddenly he gave a wry smile. He wondered if recently he had thought too much about tracking down the evil sex spies. His mind was not very clear. Everything he saw would lead to a bunch of things. Forget it, I don't care if she sleeps in or not. It has nothing to do with me. Lu Chen shook his head and walked towards the hut. In the distance, Su Qingjun had already walked into the cave residence. The stone door behind her closed with a rumble, once again sealing the cave residence. This was the only time the two of them met each other, and also the only time they had a conversation. Time passed by in the blink of an eye. Soon, it was the 4th day of Lu Chen's stay at the Flying Goose platform. This morning, the eagle fruits had not ripened yet. But when the sun had just risen in the sky, 3 people suddenly came to the entrance of the cave residence. It was Sumo, Su Qian and Su Wen. They had bloody noses and swollen faces. They looked to be in a sorry state. They ran to the stone door of the cave residence and knelt down with a plop. Then they shouted, Sister June, you have to help us." Chapter 158. The cries spread throughout the quiet Fian terrace. Of course, it also alerted Lu Chen, who was in the thatched hut. However, he had no intention of going over to join in the fun. He just leaned against the door and took a bite of a wild fruit he had plucked from somewhere. Then, with a faint smile on his face, he looked over to the side from afar. The 3 brothers of the Su family obviously knew that there was an outsider in the Fian terrace. However, the situation was urgent, so they couldn't care so much. It was not a big deal to let an unfamiliar odd-job disciple watch the fun. What was more important was to not let Su Qingjun feel that she was not pitiful enough and that she did not beg sincerely enough. The stone door stood as steady as Mount Tai and did not move for a long time. The 3 brothers of the Su family did not seem to be surprised. They just kept banging on the door and shouting. Lu Chen chewed on the juicy fruit and looked up at the sky. The sun had just risen, and it was still early in the morning. He smiled and muttered to himself, "It's so annoying to disturb people's dreams so early in the morning." After an hour, under the calls of the 3 brothers of the Su family, the stone door finally rumbled open. Then Su Qingjun walked out of the cave. Lu Chen glanced at her from afar. He saw that Su Qingjun was dressed neatly from head to toe. Her hair was meticulously combed, and her appearance was dignified and beautiful. It seemed that every bit of her was exquisite and beautiful to the point of perfection. It was amazing to see. However, in the depths of her eyes, under that calm gaze, there seemed to be a faint trace of anger that was difficult to detect. It was like the undercurrent under the calm surface of the water, with slight ripples that could not be detected. "Oh!" Lu Chen smiled and grinned. He said, "You're angry when you wake up." Sister June. When the 3 brothers of the Su family saw Su Qingjun come out, their voices immediately became louder. Their faces were full of sorrow as if they had encountered something sad. The 3 men were just short of crying bitterly. Su Qingjun's beautiful eyes swept across the 3 of them, and her face stiffened for a moment. However, she quickly controlled herself and subconsciously glanced at the spiritual field in the distance. Lu Chen leaned against the door frame and waved his hand casually with a smile, as if he was greeting her on this beautiful morning. Su Qingjun's face darkened. She glared at the man in the distance, then frowned at the 3 people in front of her. She said lightly, "What's going on?" Sumo and the others hurriedly came forward. Just as they were about to express their grievances, they heard Su Qingjun suddenly shout, "Lower your voice. Don't you feel embarrassed?" The 3 Su family brothers nodded at the same time and glanced at Lu Chen. Lu Chen smiled, turned around and walked into the depths of the spiritual field, no longer watching. However, there was still a smile on his face, and he muttered to himself, "You clearly want to avoid arousing suspicion, but you still don't let people into your cave residence?" On the other side, after seeing Lu Chen walk away, Sumo and the others hurriedly surrounded Su Qingjun and then began to talk about something. As Su Qingjun listened, her face gradually became ugly, and her eyes also became cold. There were 2 times when her arms and her sleeves trembled slightly, as if she wanted to lift them up to do something, but in the end, she resisted. In the gap between the waves of words, she occasionally looked into the distance from the corner of her eyes. The sea of clouds outside the Flying Goose platform was white and vast. Under the clear sky, it was so beautiful and dazzling. Lu Chen worked in the spiritual field for the whole morning and came out at about noon. He scooped a few spoonfuls of water from the wooden bucket beside him and drank to his heart's content. Then he saw Su Qingjuan's figure standing on the ridge of the field, silently looking at the spiritual field here, and also glanced at his face. The other 3 youths of the Su family were now nowhere to be seen. Lu Chen smiled and said to Su Qingjun, "Have they left?" Su Qingjun hummed in acknowledgement. "Let's go." Lu Chen nodded and walked over to sit on the ridge of the field, not far from Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun glanced at him and asked, "Are there eagle fruits ripe today?" "Not yet." Lu Chen pointed to the tree in front of him and said, "But there are 1 or 2 fruits that are turning red. If we are lucky, they might ripen in the afternoon." Su Qingjun was silent for a moment, and then said calmly, "Okay." With that, she turned and walked back to the cave residence. Lu Chen did not say anything more, and did not even turn back to look at her back. Amidst the refreshing and comfortable morning breeze, amidst the rustling and swaying tree leaves, the 2 of them parted just like that. From beginning to end, Lu Chen did not ask the 3 Su family brothers why they came, and Su Qingjun also did not say a word. Around 5:15 in the afternoon, an eagle fruit ripened. Lu Chen, who had been patiently guarding the spiritual field, immediately activated the heart-burning talisman. Not long after, the stone door rumbled open, and Su Qingjun came over. Compared to yesterday morning, Su Qingjun did not hide her embarrassment today and seemed much calmer. However, she did not speak much. After coming over, under Lu Chen's guidance, she plucked the ripe eagle fruit, ate it, and then adjusted her breath to activate the medicine. Everything was carried out in an orderly manner, and it seemed that the 2 of them did not even need to say a word. This unexpected coldness seemed a little awkward, but from another perspective, it seemed to be a sudden tacit understanding. After eating the eagle fruit, there was nothing else to do. Su Qingjun stood up and seemed to want to leave. Lu Chen also patted his butt and seemed to want to return to the straw hut. But at this moment, Su Qingjun suddenly asked, "Will there be any more ripe fruits today?" Lu Chen was startled at first, and then looked at the spiritual field. After a moment of silence, he said, "The other fruits that have not ripened by this time should not be very likely. We will have to wait until tomorrow." Su Qingjun nodded, indicating that she understood. But for some reason, she still stood on the ridge of the field and did not leave. Lu Chen sensed something and looked at her, then frowned and said, "Do you have something to say?" Su Qingjun was silent for a while, then softly said, "There is a small problem." Lu Chen shook his head and did not say anything. Su Qingjun looked at his expression and slightly pursed her lips and said, "Do you think I am quite stupid?" "Yes," Lu Chen said. "Hey!" Su Qingjun did not seem to expect Lu Chen to be so direct. She was stunned for a moment, then her cheeks turned red, and she said with some annoyance, "You? How can you say that?" Lu Chen said matter-of-factly, "You asked me, don't tell me you want to hear me lie." Su Qingjun stared at him for a while. Anger appeared on her face at first, but she gradually calmed down. Soon, her expression turned into one of self-mockery. She sighed and said, "That's probably the case. Lies always sound better." Lu Chen shrugged and did not reply. Su Qingjun lowered her head slightly and looked hesitant, but in the end still said, "I may still have to go down the mountain once." Lu Chen shook his head, faintly looked at her, and still did not say anything. Su Qingjun didn't know why. She was clearly far superior to Lu Chen, an ordinary errand disciple, both in terms of cultivation and status. However, when she spoke, she felt an indescribable sense of guilt, as if she had done something wrong. This feeling made her a little angry, a little embarrassed, but there was also a faint sense of guilt that she could not describe. Why would she have such a strange feeling? She herself could not explain it. She raised her head, looked at Lu Chen after a moment of hesitation, said, Can you help me again?" Lu Chen said, "When will you be back?" Su Qingjun immediately said, "I will secretly go down the mountain now. If everything goes well, I can rush back tonight." She specially emphasized the word tonight, and then softly said, "You see, counting from now, at most another hour, the sky will be dark, no one will come here at night, so this time I should not trouble you too much. And I will try my best." Lu Chen nodded. Su Qingjun gave him a deep look. She seemed to want to say something, but in the end she hesitated and only nodded silently. Then, she turned around and walked forward. "Hey!" Suddenly, Lu Chen's voice came from behind. Su Qingjun turned to look at him and said, "What is it?" "If you come back too late, there will be disciples patrolling the mountain during the curfew. Be careful, don't get caught." A faint light flashed in Su Qingjun's bright eyes, her gaze clear, and after a moment, she suddenly smiled sweetly, like a spring breeze blowing over a peaceful lake, like a green willow swaying in the wind, like a delicate flower blooming in an instant, like a beautiful embellishing the scenery. For a moment, the surroundings actually brightened. She only saw her nod and said with a smile, "Okay, I understand." In the afternoon, as Lu Chen had predicted, there were no eagle fruits ripening in the spirit fields, and fortunately, no other Su family members came to the Flying Goose Terrace again. So Lu Chen had a peaceful afternoon, and very soon, the sky became dark. The night wind whistled past, sounding louder than a few days ago, and it seemed to be a little chilly tonight. The silent Kunlun Mountains stood majestically in the night, like the silhouettes of huge giants. Lu Chen sat in the shadow of the Flying Goose Terrace, from where he could see the mountain path in the distance, but he himself was like a deep shadow, blending into the surrounding darkness. Time passed quietly, and Lu Chen waited silently and patiently. When he raised his head to look at the night sky again, the sky was dark, and it was already past midnight. Su Qingjun was still nowhere to be seen. Expressionless, Lu Chen continued to sit in the darkness, and just like that, another 2 hours passed. When there was still no movement in front of him, he frowned slightly and stood up from the darkness. He walked to the mountain path beside the Flying Goose Terrace and glanced down. Just as he was hesitating, he suddenly saw a figure suddenly rush out from the darkness in the distance, which seemed to be so thick that it could not be dispersed. The figure swept towards him, but when she was about 10 feet away from him, her body suddenly swayed and she fell to the ground. Lu Chen was shocked, and hurriedly rushed over to catch her. Upon a closer look, he saw that it was Su Qingjun. He saw that at this moment, her face was pale, but she was still conscious. She glanced at Lu Chen and smiled. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but at this moment, her body suddenly trembled, and with a soft cry, a mouthful of hot blood sprayed directly on Lu Chen's face and chest. Chapter 159. The blood was warm, and when it flowed down the skin of her cheeks, there was a prickling feeling. After Su Qingjun spat out a mouthful of blood, her body seemed to suddenly lose the strength to support it, and her whole body went limp. Lu Chen frowned and called out to Su Qingjun. Seeing that she did not respond, her face seemed abnormally pale in the dim light. He no longer hesitated. One hand passed under Su Qingjun's neck to support her shoulders, and the other hand passed under her legs. Then he used strength with both hands and directly carried Su Qingjun's body. He strode back to the Flying Goose Terrace. Just as he took 2 steps towards the cave residence, he looked down and saw that Su Qingjun's eyes were closed, as if she had lost consciousness. He immediately turned and ran to his straw hut, kicked the door open, and then placed Su Qingjun's body on the bed. A little candlelight was lit up in the middle of the night. The straw hut lit up. Lu Chen's expression was solemn. He glanced at the unconscious Su Qingjun and first grabbed one of her arms to feel her pulse. Then, his expression suddenly changed. Under the dim light, a trace of anxiety flashed across his expression, but other than that, he did not panic. His gaze then swept over Su Qingjun's limbs and body, but everything seemed to be normal. After a moment, his gaze suddenly stopped on Su Qingjun's left shoulder. The clothes there seemed to be sagging down compared to the rest of the clothes, and the color was a little abnormal. Under the candlelight, it looked like a small shadow. Lu Chen did not hesitate at all. He directly used his hands to tear off the clothes, and saw a piece of white and delicate skin. But what was shocking was that there was a purplish-black palm print on the shoulder. On the snow-like white skin, the black palm print was even more strange, and it faintly emitted a fishy smell. Lu Chen snorted coldly, and his eyes flashed twice. Suddenly, his right hand turned over, and a black short sword appeared in his palm. The incomparably sharp blade reflected a cold light under the candlelight. He raised his hand and waved the sword, and directly stabbed down. A sharp piercing sound suddenly sounded in that short moment, and the sudden cold wind caused the candlelight to sway, bringing with it a little chill. The next moment, the cold blade had directly pierced into Su Qingjuan's shoulder. Su Qingjuan's body suddenly trembled. Lu Chen seemed even more cold-blooded and merciless at this moment. He didn't even spare a glance at Su Qingjuan's beautiful face that was filled with pain. He gripped the hilt of his sword and pressed it down. The cold blade immediately cut through the flesh on the woman's shoulder. Black blood instantly gushed out, leaving behind a deep wound that made one's hair stand on end. Ah! Su Qingjun screamed, and her whole body instantly curled up. Her body trembled violently, and her face was pale. Her eyes, which had been tightly closed, seemed to suddenly wake up from the pain. With a head full of cold sweat and a pale face, she opened them. The first thing she saw was the man with his back facing the candlelight, standing in front of her with a solemn expression. "Don't talk nonsense, listen to me." This was the first sentence she heard after she woke up. There was no comfort, no sympathy, not even any question, just an emotionless indifference. "There's poison in the wound, I'm giving you poisonous blood." Su Qingjun looked down at her left shoulder, gasping for breath. "You must take medicine, there's no medicine here." "Two choices. First, I will immediately go down the mountain to find someone to help. Second, you open the Immortal's cave and look for your own Ling Dan. Do you have it?" Lu Chen said coldly, and his hands moved slowly but never stopped. As the blade moved forward, Su Qingjuan's body kept trembling. She clenched her teeth, but she couldn't suppress the painful moans. Even the corner of her eyes became misty. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Chen immediately sheathed his blade and stopped. He glanced at Su Qingjun, then turned around to leave. But at this moment, Su Qingjun, who was lying on the bed, suddenly grabbed his hand. She gasped in pain, and with a hoarse voice, she said with difficulty, "Don't go down the mountain, go to my side." Lu Chen immediately turned around and was about to carry Su Qingjun like before. But when he looked at her shoulder, he saw that after the black blood had dried up, the blood inside had turned red, but the pale skin seemed to be almost transparent, without any color, and was slightly trembling in the air. He took off his coat and covered Su Qingjuan's body. Then he carried her again and rushed out of the hut. Su Qingjun was lying in his arms. There was a strange sense of dizziness that kept hitting her head like a crazy tide. In a trance, she saw in the dark night, the mysterious and vast sky. There were dark clouds, there were stars, and they were all far away in the sky. Everything was shaking, and when he ran, the trembling came from his body, rushing forward step by step. There was a cold wind blowing on her face. But for some reason it didn't seem too cold. The sky was spinning and the earth was spinning, and the world seemed to be constantly changing. That part of the road was clearly very short in her memory, but on this night, it felt like a lifetime. She snuggled in his arms and leaned against his chest. This night was cold and lonely. Who was the one tossing and turning? Who was the one who woke up from the dream and fell into a deep sleep? When the sky was about to break, the sunlight fell on the green pines, ancient trees, strange rocks, and rock walls on the Fian platform, when the red sun in the distance was about to burst out from behind the thick layers of clouds. The Fian platform was still quiet. The silence of the night still lingered here, like the remnants of a dream that had yet to wake up. The morning wind blew over the edge of the cliff with moist clouds. A beautiful wildflower swayed in the wind on the cliff, blooming with the most beautiful grace. Lu Chen stood in the wind, looking at the wildflower. Then he looked into the distance, staring at the end of the sky. The round of the sun finally leaped up from the vast sea of clouds and rose into the sky. Tens of thousands of rays of golden light fell from the sky, turning the endless sea of clouds into a golden color. It was so bright that one couldn't look at it directly. The mountain wind blew, and his clothes fluttered. He didn't know how long he stood, but suddenly he heard the rumbling of a stone door in the distance. There were light footsteps walking towards him. Lu Chen turned and saw Su Qingjun, wrapped tightly in a white fox cloak, walking over. Her face was still pale, but her complexion was much better. In the light of the morning he could see that she didn't put on any makeup, so her hair was still a little messy, and the corners of her eyes showed some tiredness. She walked to Lu Chen's side and stood, also looking at the distant morning sun, but she didn't say anything. "You should rest more in the cave abode," Lu Chen looked at her and said. Su Qingjun smiled, her hand stretched out from under the cloak, and handed him a coat. It was the one from last night. Lu Chen took it. Su Qingjun quietly said, "There are bloodstains on the clothes." Lu Chen said, "It's okay, I'll wash it with water later." Su Qingjun quietly responded. There seemed to be a touch of shyness on her face. After hesitating, her cheeks slightly red, she quietly said, "You don't really know how to wash clothes." Lu Chen laughed, nodded and said, "It's okay, I know." Su Qingjun smiled, let out a long breath, and walked 2 steps towards the cliff. Lu Chen looked behind her, frowned and said, "Are you really okay?" Su Qingjun shook her head, smiled and said, "It's not a big deal. Last night, thanks to you treating my injuries in time, releasing the poisonous blood, and after taking the spirit pills I prepared, my injuries are more or less like this." As she said this, she seemed to think of something. A trace of mischievousness suddenly flashed across her face, and said, "Don't look down on Jean Dan Fryer's recovery ability." Lu Chen smiled and nodded, said, "That's good." A gust of cold wind blew. Su Qingjun lightly coughed a few times, then said to Lu Chen, "What happened last night? Can you please keep it a secret?" Lu Chen said, "Sure, I'll pretend I didn't see anything." Su Qingjun looked at him deeply, said, "It's not just about my injuries." Lu Chen said, "It's not just you who's injured." Su Qingjun hesitated, seemed to feel that she still had to say more clearly, and softly said, "And inside my cave abode. Also, I didn't enter that cave abode at all." Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun first smiled, then sighed and said, "I owe you a big favor." Lu Chen said, "There's no hurry, there's plenty of time in the future, you can slowly return it." Su Qingjun was amused by him, and couldn't help but laugh, and said, "You're really an interesting person." Lu Chen smiled and then said, "Although you're a very powerful Jean Dan Fryer, right now, standing on the wind must not be too comfortable. Why don't we go to the spiritual field to take a look?" Su Qingjun agreed. The two walked to the other side of the spiritual field. Along the way, Su Qingjun was always about half a step behind Lu Chen. There were a few times when she seemed to want to say something, but every time, she held back. When they walked to the edge of the spiritual field, Lu Chen pointed at the eagle fruit tree below, and said, "If there are eagle fruits that ripen today, can you eat them?" Su Qingjun was startled, as if she hadn't thought about this question. After a moment of hesitation, she said uncertainly, I should be able to?" Lu Chen looked at her, a little speechless. Su Qingjun seemed a little embarrassed and said, "I'm not very familiar with things like spirit pills." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "Then eat them first. Since they're spirit fruits, even if they don't have much of an effect, there won't be any harm." Su Qingjun nodded, and after a moment, she suddenly opened her mouth to ask Lu Chen, "Lu Chen, I have something to ask you." "Oh, go ahead." Su Qingjun looked at him quietly, and even reached out to brush a strand of her hair, and then said, "You're only a servant disciple, but when you saved me last night, your courage, decisiveness, and even the method to break my body and bleed for me were all very high level." She smiled, but there wasn't much of a smile in her eyes, and softly said, "Who are you, Lu Chen?" Chapter 160. The Flying Goose Terrace was quiet for a while, with a few mountain breezes blowing. Because Lu Chen did not speak, Su Qingjun also quietened down. She looked at him calmly, as if waiting for his answer with unusual patience. After a while, Lu Chen said, "Can I not answer this question?" Su Qingjun thought about it and said, "You just helped me so much, I definitely can't force you. It's fine if you don't want to say it, but I really want to know." Lu Chen smiled, then turned and walked away, saying, "Thank you for your understanding." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, then shouted at his back, "You really don't want to say?" Lu Chen smiled and waved at her. Then he walked into his thatched hut. Su Qingjun was momentarily angry. In the past, any young man in front of her would mostly be in fear and trepidation. Answering every question she asked was also the right thing to do. She did not expect to meet with a soft rebuff today. She glared at the straw hut, clenched her teeth, and angrily wrapped her cloak tighter around herself, then turned and strode away. However, after walking for a while, she suddenly stopped again, her brows slightly furrowed, as if she had forgotten something. After a while, she turned back, walked to the door of the straw hut, and knocked on the door. "Please come in." Lu Chen's voice came from inside. Su Qingjun opened the door and saw Lu Chen sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at her and saying, "What's wrong?" "And there's something." Su Qingjun said, "The matter you mentioned to me before, I thought about it a few times, and I think, still." For some reason, she seemed to be at a loss at the end, and her words were not very clear. Lu Chen looked strangely at Su Qingjun, asking, "What is it?" Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. It seemed that she had finally made up her mind. She said, "During this period of time, you will help me stop the other members of the Su family." Lu Chen was slightly surprised. "You've actually thought it through?" Su Qingjun smiled bitterly. She said softly, "First, I'm injured now. It's not good for me to meet people like this, and it's not good for others to know the truth. I need you to help me. Second, after last night, I'm actually a little cold-hearted. I also feel that it's not good to take care of you like this." Lu Chen frowned and said, "I haven't asked you, but what happened last night?" Su Qingjun said indifferently, "It's not a big deal. Sumo's group of 3 are used to being insolent in Kunwa City. They provoked someone and got into a conflict. After a big fight, they asked someone else to fight again. They said that person was only a very strong cultivator at the peak of the foundation building realm. Who would have thought that in the end, another person with strange Taoist techniques, Jean Dan Friar, would appear?" Lu Chen was silent. After a moment, he nodded and said, "No wonder." Su Qingjun also seemed unwilling to talk about this topic. She looked up at Lu Chen and said, "Can you help me with this matter?" Lu Chen smiled. He met her gaze and said, "You're only asking me to help you stop people because it's not good for you to meet people. I don't want to do this." Su Qingjun frowned and said, "Why?" "If I help you with this matter, I'll offend many people in the Su family. Have you thought about it?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "I'm neither your relative nor friend, and I have no enmity with the other people in the Su family. Why should I provoke this kind of trouble?" Su Qingjun was startled. She seemed to be surprised by Lu Chen's sudden coldness and outspokenness. She said, "Didn't you?" Lu Chen gently waved his hand and said, "In fact, you still feel from the bottom of your heart that it's only right and proper for others to help you, don't you?" Su Qingjun was silent for a long time. Then she lightly pursed her lips and said, "I was wrong." Her complexion was a bit pale because of her injuries, but it also added a bit of a graceful beauty that made people feel sorry for her. However, Lu Chen seemed to turn a blind eye to this. He just calmly looked at her without saying a word. Su Qingjun raised her head and looked at him. She said, "I've thought about it. It's not good for me to show my current appearance to others. I do need your help this time. Are you willing to help me? If you need me to give you some compensation, we can discuss it." At this point, she seemed to be a little embarrassed and said with a hint of self-mockery, "Anyway, I just owed you a huge favor. I'll owe you a little more in the future. I'll just treat it as if I'll repay you slowly in the future." Lu Chen looked at her slightly pale but still beautiful face. After a while, he suddenly sighed and said, "Since it's come to this, I'll help you to the end." Su Qingyan immediately smiled sweetly and said, "Thank you. You're really a good person." "A good person?" Lu Chen murmured and shook his head. He then looked at Su Qingjun and said seriously, "I can help you with this matter, but I can't do it alone. In order to stop someone, I will definitely offend someone. So, you must support me." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Okay." Lu Chen had no intention of brushing it off. Instead, he stared into her eyes and said, "I'll make it clear. I want you to support me. You can ignore ordinary insults, but if someone attacks me, you'll hit him where he hits me. You'll have to return double the amount of damage." Su Qingjun suddenly became silent. After a while, she smiled bitterly and said, "I really want to agree, but I'm really worried that when the time comes, I won't be able to do it." Lu Chen nodded and looked at the woman with a gentler gaze. He said, "It's rare that you're willing to tell me the truth." After a pause, he said, "Or do you feel embarrassed?" Su Qingjun said with some distress, "I also know that the people in my family are not all good people. There are also many bad things. But we all grew up in a family, and there are so many relatives connected by blood. I grew up among these people. It's really, even if they always take advantage of you and make you work hard for them, even if you get injured and vomit blood, none of them come to see you. Can't you feel embarrassed like this?" Su Qingjun looked like she was struggling. In the end, she smiled bitterly and said, "My master also reprimanded me for this matter several times. He also scolded me that if I don't change my mind, it will be difficult for me to become a great person in the future." Lu Chen was startled and said with some surprise, "That old man Mu Yuan actually said that to you?" Su Qingjun sighed and said, "Master loves me so much that he hates me for not becoming steel. Of course, these words can't be taken seriously. Hey, don't talk nonsense. How dare you call my master an old man?" She lowered her voice and said, "My master is good to me, but his temper is not so good to others. Be careful not to be caught by him, then you will be in trouble." Lu Chen looked at her and suddenly laughed. He nodded and said, "All right, because of what you said, I will teach you a way." Su Qingjun was a little surprised. Lu Chen said seriously, "Don't you think your attitude is wrong? It seems a little, but this is the devil in the heart." Lu Chen suddenly interrupted Su Qingjun's words. Su Qingjun was startled and said, "What? Devil in the heart?" "Yes, devil in the heart." Lu Chen said seriously, "Hey, don't look at me with that kind of expression, okay? I know the term devil in the heart. It sounds really stupid, always giving people the feeling that you are a swindler. How can you be worthy of a prestigious sect like ours? But think about it, everything about you is good. In the eyes of outsiders, you are almost a perfect girl. But when it comes to the people from the Su family, you become like this. There is something wrong, right?" Su Qingjun nodded slowly and said, "Yes." Lu Chen said again, "Actually, I see that you are so smart, you might have thought about these things in your heart. You just can't think of a way to get rid of these burdens in your heart, right?" "Burdens in the heart? Devil in the heart?" Su Qingjun murmured a few words. Her eyes brightened a little and looked at Lu Chen and said, "Really have a way?" "Yes, of course, whether it works or not depends on the person." "What way? Let me hear it." "Flip the table." "Flip the table?" "Yes, flip the table." At this moment, Su Qingjun only felt that her mind was in a mess. She always felt that everything the man in front of her said was too unreliable. But somewhere in her heart, there seemed to be a strange expectation. Maybe it works? Maybe it really works? But what is the way to flip the table? Su Qingjun asked in distress, looking at Lu Chen with a face of disbelief. "Look, I have a table here." Lu Chen pointed to the only wooden table in the thatched hut. "Oh, you hold it," Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun looked at him strangely. She wondered if she had been beaten silly. But after hesitating for a while, she still slowly walked over and held the table with her hand. "How does it feel?" Lu Chen asked. This is made of wood. Su Qingjun said. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, nonsense. What else? Su Qingjun thought for a while and said, the surface is quite rough and not very smooth. The grain of the tree is also ordinary. It shouldn't be some precious wood. The workmanship is SOSO. It doesn't look valuable and… Hey! Lu Chen angrily stopped her and said impatiently, you woman! Why do you think differently from ordinary people all the time? Let me ask you, this table is made of wood. Is it very heavy? Su Qingjuan's fair fingers grabbed the edge of the table and lifted it. Then she looked at Lu Chen and said, it's not heavy. Have you forgotten that I am Jean Dan Friar? Lu Chen looked up at the sky and revealed an expression as if there was nothing left to live for. After a while, he lowered his head, as if he was barely controlling his emotions and the muscles on his face. He said, like this, you have to think of this table as the heaviest thing in the world. Because on top of it, it is the devil in your heart that you can't get rid of all these years. It is the hesitation and entanglement that you can't get rid of. Su Qingjuan's expression immediately darkened and turned solemn. Lu Chen's eyes lit up. He clapped his hands and said, that's it. Then you can flip the table, as if you have gotten rid of all the devils in your heart. Flip? Flip the table. Boom! There was a loud noise, and the flying goose platform seemed to shake. A wooden table broke out of the house and flew high into the air. After a long while, it landed heavily on the ground and broke into pieces with a pa sound. The surroundings were quiet. After a while, Lu Chen's angry voice suddenly came from the dilapidated hut. He shouted, hey! Are you going to flip the table or tear down the hut? Sorry. I am Jean Dan. I couldn't control myself. Shut up. Oh. Chapter 161. Jean Dan Friar? What's so great about Jean Dan Friar? Just because you're a golden core cultivator, you can come here and destroy other people's houses? A series of complaints came from the thatched hut with a large hole in the roof. A gloomy Lu Chen was stepping on the broken pieces of the wooden table, trying hard to repair the hole in the roof. Far away from the door, beside the cave, the stone door was half open. Su Qingjun was standing by the door, looking a little guilty as she poked her head out to look at the thatched hut. Occasionally, she could hear the complaints that came with the wind, making her already pink cheeks even redder, revealing a soul-stirring beauty. She suddenly felt her face burning. She reached out and gently touched her cheeks, looking a little ashamed and guilty. But she didn't know why, but after a while, she suddenly snickered to herself, probably thinking of something that even she found too funny. Flipping the table? What are you flipping? If you have so much strength, why don't you chop down trees? Listening to the man who seemed to be complaining gloomily, Su Qingjun leaned against the door, suddenly covered her mouth with her hand and giggled, then turned and walked in. The stone door closed behind her, and only her light footsteps could be seen faintly as she walked into the depths of the cave. The matter was finally settled. But strangely, in the next 2 or 3 days, the Flying Goose Terrace was unexpectedly peaceful. No one came to disturb them. And the ripening of the eagle fruit also began to stabilize. Almost every day there would be 1 or 2 fruits ripening, and then Lu Chen would call Su Qingjun out to eat them. When the two met, they would chat, and their relationship seemed to become more familiar, occasionally joking. Such peaceful days made people feel unexpectedly comfortable, as if they were in a paradise. In the majestic Kunlun, in this vast world, the small Flying Goose Terrace seemed to be a small world for the two of them. In the middle of this, Masato Kihara came again, but at that time, Su Qingjuan's injuries had mostly recovered, and there seemed to be nothing wrong with her. After chatting for a while, Masato Kihara warned her a few things, and then left in a hurry. As for Lu Chen, whom he had a deep impression of before, Masato Kihara actually ignored him this time, which was a little strange. Because of this, Su Qingjun expressed a little doubt and puzzlement to Lu Chen, but Lu Chen was very narrow-minded and sharp, and said, "Your master probably wants to forget the reward he promised me." Su Qingjun was angry and amused at the same time, and only said that it was impossible. But when Lu Chen was about to argue with her, she floated away and only said, "It's still early today, I'm going back to sleep, to practice. If you need anything, use the Burning Heart Talisman to call me. On the 9th day of Lu Chen's stay in the Flying Goose Terrace. This morning, he got up as usual, looked at the newly repaired roof, touched the table that had been rebuilt with wood, and then went out to fetch water to wash his face. He looked at the rising sun, looked down at the sea of clouds, and walked around the Flying Goose Terrace, and then busied himself in the spiritual field. When the mountain wind blew over from the cliff, the old pine trees swayed slightly, and the leaves rustled. It felt like another beautiful and quiet day. Unfortunately, this peaceful and beautiful land did not last for too long. A sound from a distance broke the peace of the Flying Goose Terrace. Lu Chen stood up from the spiritual field, walked up the ridge, and looked in the direction of the mountain road, and then sighed softly. On the mountain road, the three brothers, Sumo, Su Qian, and Su Wen, were striding over. Lu Chen put down the things in his hands and looked down. He saw that his body, especially his trousers and shoes, were stained with black mud and dust, and there was a lot of it on his clothes. He did not look like a cultivator at all, and was obviously a tenant farmer. But it seemed that there was not much difference between a part-time disciple and a tenant farmer. Lu Chen muttered to himself, probably in a self-deprecating manner. Then, he clapped his hands and walked over. He stopped in front of the three Su brothers with a smile on his face about 30 to 40 feet away from the cave. "Senior Su brothers, long time no see." He smiled and cupped his hands and said, "How come you have time to come here today?" When the three saw Lu Chen, except for Sumo, who was standing in the middle, Su Qian and Su Wen all nodded, probably thinking that Lu Chen was now helping Su Qingjun. Although he was still far from the level of Su Qingjuan's confidence, he still had basic manners. But after a while, when they saw the black mud on Lu Chen's body and feet, the three of them immediately showed contempt and disgust, probably because they thought that Lu Chen was too dirty. "Yes." Su Wen casually responded, waved his hand as if he was shooing away flies, and said, "We want to see Sister June, don't block the way." With that, the three of them prepared to walk forward, but they had only taken 2 steps when they suddenly found that Lu Chen was still standing in the same place, blocking their way. Although he still had a gentle smile on his face, he had no intention of giving way. Su Biao frowned and said, "What is the meaning of this?" Just as Lu Chen was about to speak, he heard Sumo say coldly, "Stinking brat, don't look for a beating." Lu Chen paused, his gaze lingering on Sumo's face for a moment, but his expression did not change. He still smiled warmly at the three of them and said, "Three young masters, it's like this. These 2 days, Shiji Su clearly told us that she wants to practice a secret technique, so she will not see anyone for the time being." The expressions of the 3 Su family brothers changed. Sumo seemed to have the worst temper, at least in front of an odd-job disciple like Lu Chen, she was the worst. She opened her mouth and scolded, "Bullshit. You said you will go into seclusion, and you will not see her? Who do you think you are?" Lu Chen said, "My status is lowly, of course I cannot be compared to the 3 young Master Su. However, it is precisely because of this that I ask the 3 of you to think about it carefully. I am only an odd-job disciple, how would I dare to pretend to be the will of Shiji Su and recklessly obstruct you?" When these words came out, Su Qian and Su Wen were both startled, and their originally angry expressions eased a little. Su Qian pulled the furious Sumo and said in a low voice, "What he said is somewhat reasonable. Maybe Sister June really has something to do, and it is temporarily inconvenient for her to see us." Before Sumo could speak, Su Wen, who was at the side, already frowned and said, "Even if that is the case, we have already come, don't tell me we are going to go back like this." Su Qian said, "Otherwise, what do you want to do?" Sumo snorted and said, "How can I not know Sister June's temper? Everyone move aside, I will go over and knock on the door. If I do it a few more times, she will naturally come out to see us." Finished speaking, she casually walked forward. Lu Chen stood in the same place, and a trace of helplessness appeared on his face as he looked at Sumo. Sumo walked in front of him, and looked at Lu Chen from head to toe. She sneered and said, "Stinking brat, I think you have eaten the heart of a bear and the guts of a leopard. I have already said things like this, and you still dare to block my way? Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, Young Master Su, with your status, I presume that you are also a reasonable person? Bang! Suddenly, there was a muffled sound. It was Sumo who directly lifted her leg and kicked Lu Chen's lower abdomen. Immediately, Lu Chen was kicked to the ground, and he even rolled a few times on the ground. Lu Chen curled up his body. Probably because he had been kicked quite hard, he even began to cough violently, and at the same time, gasped for breath. Speak your mother's reason. Sumo sneered. Who do you think you are? Do you think you are qualified to speak reason with me? After cursing this sentence, he swaggered past Lu Chen. Su Qian and Su Wen followed up, and indifferently glanced at Lu Chen who was lying on the ground. Then they said to Sumo, how can you be so impulsive? In any case, this person is helping Sister June to plant trees. If you do this, it will not look good on Sister June, Sumo said indifferently. Pit. A person with this kind of status dares to put on airs in front of us. Isn't that asking for a beating? So be it. So what if Sister June comes over? At most, she will only say a few words to us. It's not a big deal. Oh, that's true. Su Qian and Su Wen both nodded in agreement. As they spoke, the three of them arrived at the stone door of the Abode of Immortals cave. They loudly knocked on the door and shouted, Sister June, come out for a moment. We have something to talk to you about. Lying on the ground, Lu Chen held his lower abdomen with both hands while looking at the stone door of the Abode of Immortals cave. After a while, only a rumbling sound could be heard. After a while, Su Qingjun expressionlessly walked out with a somewhat frosty temperament. It seemed that she was not in a good mood. The three brothers of the Su family simultaneously had the same feeling. However, they had long since become proficient in dealing with this sister. Immediately, they surrounded her and fought to be the first to speak. Su Qingjun listened with an indifferent expression. Her gaze passed over the three people surrounding her and saw Lu Chen, who had been beaten to the ground in front of her. She saw that his complexion was somewhat pale and that his hands were covering his abdomen. There was also a distinct footprint there. In the morning light, a shadow seemed to suddenly pass through her bright and clear eyes. She seemed to want to say something, to do something, but she slowly lowered her head. Lu Chen lay on the ground. His face did not have much of an expression. He only quietly looked at her. After a while, Su Qingjun suddenly ignored the three noisy brothers. She clenched her teeth and strode towards the thatched cottage in the distance. Not long after, she arrived in front of the thatched cottage. She pushed open the door and walked in. The three brothers of the Su family looked at each other in dismay. There was a puzzled expression on their faces. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed. He smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, Why do you insist on going to my thatched cottage? I don't believe that there is no table in your cave residence. Bang! Suddenly, a loud sound came from the thatched cottage. Lu Chen and the three brothers of the Su family looked together. They saw a wooden table break out of the house, smashing a big hole in the roof of the thatched cottage. It flew up high and then fell down heavily. With a crackling sound, it was immediately smashed into pieces. After a while, Su Qingjun slowly walked out of the house. The expression on her face was somewhat strange. She seemed to be a little nervous, but strangely, there was also some inexplicable excitement. Her hands were clenched into fists. If you looked closely, you could even see that her hands were faintly trembling. It seemed that she was very nervous and excited. She fixed her gaze on Sumo and the others. Then she slowly walked over. Sumo laughed heartily and greeted her. She laughed loudly and said, Sister June, I know that you are still the best to me. Just now, this blind servant tried to stop me and did not let me see you. I kicked him away. See, you are still the best to me. Before he finished speaking, Su Qingjun had already walked in front of him. Suddenly, her eyes shone with a strange light. She seemed excited and agitated. Her eyes were surging violently like the waves of the sea. Just as Sumo danced and ran over, the woman suddenly lifted her foot. It was as if the scene just now was replaying in an instant. Su Qingjun kicked Sumo's stomach. Then, there was a scream like a pig being slaughtered. Sumo's whole body was kicked up into the air. With a bang, she was kicked directly onto the hard mountain wall. At the same time, accompanied by a few clear sounds of bones breaking, she rolled down. The wind blew over Yentai Mountain. It was silent in an instant. Everyone held their breath, dumbstruck. Chapter 162. Lu Chen laid on the ground and laid his body flat. Looking at the sky, he saw that it was an azure blue, so clear that it was almost transparent. Then he smiled slightly. Not far from him, Sumo was sent flying by Su Qingjuan's kick. After rolling down the hard stone wall, she seemed to have lost her mind in an instant. Not only had her eyes turned white, her hands were waving randomly, as if trying to grab onto some illusory life-saving straw. Her mouth was also muttering some gibberish that no one could understand. On the other side, Su Qian and Su Wen were completely scared silly. They stood motionless on the spot, staring at Su Qingjun with wide eyes, as if they had seen the most terrifying and inconceivable thing in their lives. After a long while, Su Qian stammered, Jun, Sister Jun, why did you kick Sumo? Su Qingjun turned around and looked at Su Qian. Her gaze was so cold that it was as if a basin of ice water had been poured on Su Qian's head. In an instant, the chill seeped into his bones, causing Su Qian to swallow back the words he was about to say. His forehead was also covered in cold sweat. Su Qingjun walked in front of Su Qian and Su Wen, looking at them expressionlessly. She asked indifferently, "Do you have any dissatisfaction?" These 5 words were not spoken quickly. Every word was heard clearly, but for some reason, Su Qian only felt a chill run down his spine. Under Su Qingjuan's cold gaze, he subconsciously shook his head. Who knew that at this moment, Su Wen, who was standing beside him, might have not been directly stared at by Su Qingjuan's strange gaze. He actually still had some courage left and said in a low voice, "Sister Jun, how can you be like this? You can't hit us?" A crisp sound rang out. Su Qian clearly saw that fair and beautiful palm suddenly swing up, and a slap landed on Su Wen's face. Su Wen floated backwards, clutching his face and howling in pain as he fell to the ground, rolling several times. Lu Chen, who was lying on the ground, noticed another strange detail. After Su Qingjun slapped him to her heart's content, she suddenly clenched her fists and bit her red lips with her pearly white teeth. Her breathing was slightly rapid, and she even panted a few times. She seemed to have relaxed after a moment of nervousness. After taking a deep breath, Su Qingjun looked at Su Qian again and asked softly, "Can I hit you?" Su Qian's face was drained of all color. With a pu sound, he directly knelt down, stammering, "Yes, yes. Sister Jun, please spare my life." Su Qian and Su Wen, who had crawled up from the ground, were also scared out of their wits. The two of them dragged the unconscious Sumo, who was already foaming at the mouth, and ran in a sorry state up the mountain path. Su Qingjun watched the 3 figures disappear into the distance. She was silent for a long time, the expression on her face fluctuating. Her chest heaved up and down, as if there were all kinds of intense emotions surging in her heart. She couldn't calm them down for a long time. After a while, she silently turned around and walked to the side of Lu Chen, who was still lying on the ground. She glanced at him and asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I was kicked in the stomach. Look, there are footprints on this shirt." Lu Chen pointed at the footprint left by Sumo and said to Su Qingjun. When Su Qingjun saw his expression and tone of voice, the trace of worry on her face finally dissipated. She couldn't help but laugh. However, she felt that it was somewhat inappropriate to look down on Lu Chen like this, so she simply squatted down. She placed her hands on her knees and propped her chin up. There was a somewhat strange smile on her face, as if she wanted to open her mouth to ask something, but was somewhat hesitant. Unknowingly, she was lost in thought. After a while, she suddenly called out to Lu Chen. "What?" Lu Chen lay on the ground and glanced at the beautiful girl squatting beside him. Su Qingjun laughed before saying anything. Then, her cheeks slightly reddened, but she seemed to be secretly delighted. She said to him, Did I look very impressive just now? Lu Chen nodded his head heavily and sternly said, Extremely impressive. Su Qingjun sighed and looked at her palm. She said, That feeling just now. How do I put it, it was very strange. Tell me about it. There was clearly a voice in my heart that kept telling me that I shouldn't hit him, but after I really kicked him like that, my heart suddenly felt very, very comfortable. Lu Chen looked at her with a smile and said, Do you feel that the things that were pressing on your heart in the past suddenly disappeared? Su Qingjun took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, even my body feels much more relaxed. After a pause, she suddenly raised her hand and waved it in the air. There was a trace of yearning on her face. She softly said to herself, I really want to hit him again. Lu Chen was startled. He turned over and sat up. It's fine if you just let it out for a while. How can it be so exaggerated? Su Qingjun pursed her lips and laughed. She said, I'm just saying it casually. But I really didn't expect that your method would actually. She was momentarily at a loss for words, as if she couldn't think of a particularly good way to describe it. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, Don't think about it. It's fine as long as it's useful. Su Qingjun hugged her knees. She looked like a girl who had returned to her childhood. She giggled, and her face exuded a bright radiance with an unusually beautiful joy. Will there be trouble later? Lu Chen climbed up from the ground and patted the dust off his body. Su Qingjun thought for a moment and said, There should be. The three of them have been spoiled since they were young. When they return, they will definitely complain. Lu Chen said, Then have you thought about how to deal with it? Su Qingjun shrugged. She seemed a little mischievous and a little lazy. She said indifferently, Who cares? We'll see when the time comes. Oh. It was unknown whether the news of Su Qingjun's sudden outburst and beating up the three Su family brothers unexpectedly spread. In the following days, the Flying Goose Terrace was abnormally quiet. No one came to disturb them. Lu Chen sighed and gloomily went to repair the roof of the thatched hut. Then he went to the forest behind the Flying Goose Terrace to cut a few pieces of wood to build a table. But this time, he simply put the table outside the door. Su Qingjun came over and saw it. She was very surprised and asked him why he did this. Lu Chen said seriously, In the future, you can flip the table if you want. You're the Jean Dan and you're the boss. But don't ever tear down my house again. I only have a broken thatched hut here. It can't withstand any more trouble. At that moment, Su Qingjun's face turned red. She looked like a messy white flower with a hint of red in the wind. She was very angry and complained to Lu Chen for a long time, but he refused. She complained that the table was extremely ugly, poorly made, and unsightly. If someone saw it outside and this matter was leaked, she would lose face in the mountains of Kunlun. Coincidentally, there was an eagle fruit that had ripened. The two walked to the spiritual field. Su Qingjun directly threw it into her mouth and ate it. When her mouth was still bulging, she grabbed Lu Chen and refused to let him go. She said angrily, Wait here. Lu Chen had no choice but to wait for her. He sat on the ridge of the field and watched the scenery. When the wind blew over the cliff, he suddenly found that the cliff rocks seemed to be covered with beautiful wildflowers overnight. Later, after Su Qingjun catalyzed the medicine, she stared at him and used both carrot and stick tactics to persuade him. In the end, Lu Chen was pestered by her. Seeing that dusk was coming, he could only say, Then you can't casually tear down my house in the future. Su Qingjun repeatedly waved her hand and said with a smile that she wouldn't tear it down. Lu Chen looked at her suspiciously and said, Do you keep your word? Su Qingjun said, Of course I keep my word. You must believe me. Lu Chen said, Of course I believe you. Then he shook his head and sighed. He moved the ugly and crudely made table back and put it back in the thatched hut. Su Qingjun immediately became happy. She was in a good mood as she strolled around the Flying Goose platform. That fiery red feather shawl shone brightly on her shoulders, setting off her beautiful face. When the sun set, she even jokingly said to Lu Chen that if she knew that it would be so peaceful now, she would have fought earlier. To this, Lu Chen naturally did not comment. He only smiled and did not speak. Such relaxed and happy days passed by quickly. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 days had passed. The eagle fruit on the flying goose platform had already been eaten. Su Qingjuan's cultivation in the Jin Dan realm had finally completely eliminated all the hidden dangers and flaws and completely stabilized. Then, Lu Chen was about to leave. That day, he personally plucked the last ripe eagle fruit and handed it to Su Qingjun, who was standing at the side. He smiled and congratulated her. Then he turned and went to his thatched hut to pack his luggage. Su Qingjun held the last fruit and seemed a little emotional. She quietly stared at the fruit in her palm. After a long while, she slowly ate it. When he went down the mountain, Su Qingjun came over to send him off. It was when the sun was setting. The light shone on the boundless sea of clouds. Rays of golden light shone down, elongating their shadows. The two smiled at each other and waved goodbye. Before he left, Su Qingjun called out to him again. "If you need my help in the future, you can come to me." Lu Chen smiled. "That good?" Su Qingjun smiled. "Yes. I still owe you a lot of favors." Lu Chen laughed. He nodded to her. He then strode down the mountain path. When he was about to turn a corner, he looked back. In the distance, on the other side of the flying goose platform, the beautiful figure was still standing there under the setting sun. Then she seemed to see him looking back. She stretched out an arm and waved at him from afar. At that moment, the sunset filled the sky. It was as beautiful as a burning fire. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.